City of Phoenix.
Oh, Phoenix is rules. They think they're easy. They're actually really hard.
They're unbelievably inconsistent.
Yeah, complex. And but that happens in any city that just keeps recreating things
Instead
and not
of
dealing with the old stuff.
and not cleaning it up.
Yeah.
They need like a total zoning ordinance overhaul.
Well, I started one in the city of Tucson, and it's still going on. It's for 3 years. It takes that long.
That's it,
But you got to do it.
You have to do it. I mean, they're not. I was telling the mayor, I said, you need a mindset here. If you're going to do this, that fully embraces, redevelopment or renovation.
Right. No,
and that carries top down through every person, so that when I'm dealing with my guide intake,
explore what's in our
his
bag.
mindset is
No, please tell us.
you get this done.
I hear they're tailor-made specifically to you.
No, you don't have 5 papers.
That's inspiring.
It's like this total power play.
I'm going to give an example
seriously?
of what I think is the best city redevelopment plan from a process point of view. Some people have better vision. Albuquerque's downtown.
I'm going to take a wild guess.
Process.
There's a pen.
It's the best plan I've ever seen.
Is it flexible?
It's beyond flexible.
It has like context
No,
sensitivity.
it's all content.
I love it.
And it's
Because
the
everybody
best part
needs
about
a holding
it. All their time frames are guaranteed.
And a mug.
This is what I'm going to do for you.
And
They commit.
They commit.
Oh my God.
They will actually commit and say, you're going to get, when you apply and your application is
weird today, but
accepted,
mine had no
then
pack.
from that point to your building permit,
It's going to take
45
It's missing a
or
back.
whatever it is.
Yeah, whatever it is, whatever they work it out.
And
Plus,
they
I
stick
think
to
it
it.
would
And then
hold
their
up very
whole
well on
plan,
this
instead
shirt.
of being, all these prescriptive codes, everything's in context, to what's around it, to these areas. And their vision and their investments are in there too.
I know you'll want to wear that.
So it's the best of the government plans I've seen. That's the best one. That's called their
I have
2012
a
downtown
button
implementation.
from
It's 100
Carefree that
pages.
says I love
But a lot of
Carefree.
it is, these
And they literally
contextual.
have like a basket.
It's like a mix of it. Yeah, it's but even their design guidelines are, it's more showing images and saying this is what we
Decide
want
to
in
just
relationship to this.
rock that
And we're not
very
going to tell
often,
you
but
this is what you've got to put
you
in.
never know.
So they leave the room for creativity.
Right, and so that
love
someone
that.
can look at it and say, yeah, you're doing it. They worry about massing more than
That's what I keep
All
saying.
that is Arizona.
It needs to be more about scale, massing, context.
So I like
I would check that out.
yeah. It's interesting. And again, it's not saying that much. I don't want
What's that?
most of
Yes.
the other government ones are so.
I think we're in
maybe
regulations
that just
now.
stood out.
A review.
Denver, they've been able to
Review
achieve some
and
pretty great strides. How are theirs in comparison? Are they still pretty complicated and maybe over-controlled?
No, it's funny because you'll get some places that will lax their code to the point
There we go.
that if the market's right and you've got that product yet. Denver, I tell my friends in Denver, they're lucky because they have stock there. It's wonderful building.
What?
They were smart enough not to tear it
And
all
they
down.
didn't tear it all down. And Portland was smart in that they forced redevelopment by putting and so people like that are successful when they
Only because I knew we were doing the venue here, and then we're coming to what you were giving me tourism here too. So I didn't want to take all the air. out of that balloon. So that's all.
And so, a lot of it, unfortunately, comes down to the market, how it takes care of it. What I like about Denver, more than Portland, is Denver stays out of your way. And they'll tell you what they want, and they'll work with you, but then they stay out of your way. Portland is a little...
Okay, I think we're about ready to start.
Getting you. They think that the city thinks of themselves.
It's interesting. That could be an interesting.
Yeah, it's an interesting city.
Okay, so a recap for, I see a few new people in the audience. This morning we had introductions. We won't go through that again, but if anybody has just arrived and you want to know who's up here, there's some written descriptions of all the panelists here, but I think for those who were in attendance, you would confirm that there's an awful lot of expertise, myself excluded, from that company, but folks here really know their business around the topics that we were asked to discuss, retail, commercial, office, housing, education, entertainment venues, etc. So we went through all of those topics. We came up with a short list of some of the key issues related to each, and one of my colleagues, Sharif, to my left, is adding some additional ones that he heard us discuss, such that we will have a sheet that will pick off some of the key topics that emerged from each of those issue areas that we focused on this morning. This afternoon, we're going to talk about regulatory issues, and I think it really gets into what can a city do to help incentivize, or as someone pointed out in a not effective case, disincentivize some of these things. So we'll get into some of those issues. I think Jaret, to my right, will be particularly helpful, given that he's worked with the city of Tucson, again, on the other side of the table. But everyone here, I'm sure, has had some experience with either regulations and or incentives that would cause them to act or not, and we'll get into some of that. We will then discuss tourism. We got into that a bit early with Reed, in that it's sort of impossible to talk about an entertainment venue, the physical venue, without talking about the programming that gets people coming here, which pretty much gets you into the topic of tourism. And to what level do you want to have Fountain Hills become a tourist destination site is what we'll discuss. And then we'll wrap up by looking at our list that we've made here, giving us a few summary points. And, if you will, a to-do list for the city of Fountain Hills, town of Fountain Hills, to start implementation. Now, you've heard some things about the economic climate that everybody's more than well aware of that maybe causes you to be less than enthusiastic about going out and building more housing or building more office, and in fact, it just plain isn't possible at this time. I think if you heard what was being said at the table this morning. However, a downtime is a great time to plan, and so hopefully you all will come away with those things that should be top of mind that take your envisioning the future of downtown plan into the next step of implementation, and we'll try to make sure that we give you what we think those points are. So Jaret is going to kick off the topic of regulation. Again, all these topics were developed in concert with city planners here, councilmen, councilwomen, whoever really was anxious to have, and we're very glad to be here to have the ULI folks come. These topics were developed in concert with all of you over the past year, so these weren't things that we came up with. And regulatory issues was one that deserved its own special time period, and so that's what we're going to talk about right now. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jaret.
Thanks. First of all, I want to thank everybody for coming today and allowing us to come and kind of give our thoughts and opinion. I think it's important and valuable for both of us, especially to see some things that are going on. Some people in the panel wanted me to admit that I don't like living in Tucson. I'm not saying that's true, but they wanted me to say that out loud. So you guys will accept my recommendations maybe a little better. But what I want to talk about is a little about regulation. And, there's no right or wrong way to implement a vision plan. The three most common ways to do it, or at least the ways that we see throughout the West and around the country, are either through a zoning district in your land use code, a kind of hybrid model with an overlay, or through some type of specific planning document like a planned area development. And so throughout the country, you'll see it done different ways. And I'll talk a little bit about, at the end, what I think the way to go might be. But the most important element to me of all this discussion, this is all great about what we want to see, but it's really, to me, about how are you going to get there? And not only how are you going to get there as far as your investment, but physically, how are you going to get there? How are you going to implement this type of plan? So, I went through the documents and I went through the zoning code, and, what I see is a typical suburban zoning code with some elements that are written specifically in it for this idea of this town center, this idea of this vision. And, I brought it up earlier, and I think what's going to be important, and it should be, I think, the theme when Bob's working on this. I want it to be your theme. I want you to say the things that people want, the vision that collectively, this group and the community have come together to say that this is what we want to see. Make it easy to happen. Because what we often do when writing regulations and codes is become overly prescriptive and write a lot of what we think we need to say in there in such a way that leads a private developer on a path that's actually hard to make that happen. And so if you want something to happen, make it easy in your regulations to get there and show them how to get there. I think the most important thing in any land use code, in any type of regulation, is that you're able to clearly define what you're trying to do, why you're trying to do it, and what the process is to get there. And in a code like this, I hope the people who work on it and work with it find ways to make it as simplified as possible. We were just talking up here before we started about some different cities and how they've seen, development and redevelopment happen in areas, and who's had a good time of it and who's had a bad time and why. And if you look through it, and I'll give some examples of some cities that I think have good codes to look at, but really what it comes down to is there's almost an inverse relationship between the amount of procedures and regulations in your code and people who are successful in redevelopment. Now, that's not to say that there shouldn't be any rules whatsoever. I'm certainly not saying that. There has to be some type of structure. But it seems that the cities that just add regulations on top of regulations over decades and decades seem to struggle the most to redevelop because, once the use is there, it's there. To come back and fix it later is a whole different issue and a whole different ballgame. And a lot of what you're dealing with here, even though we think of this as not an urban area, it's still redevelopment and those same redevelopment issues. So, just the notes that I wrote down, to start is that I like the vision plan because, you're setting the stage for development. The hardest thing to do is to come to a consensus with your community about what you're trying to be and what you want to be. So if you have that, that's great, and that's a great start. The next step, for me, what I need to see in the next document is some type of strategic plan for investment, strategic plan for positioning and marketing. What happens often is we'll tell Lori, where's Lori? We'll tell her, hey, you know what, we've got this great plan, now go make it happen, and not give her the resources to go and actually help make that happen. And so I think it's important in this that not only for you as a community to make that commitment and investment, but for the people you're asking to come in and develop in there, that they understand what your level of commitment and investment is. And that includes if you're going to do things such as improvement districts, community facility districts, or even business improvement districts, implement that now as part of these policies. If you're going to need that type of capital investment, to do any type of road improvements, sewer improvements, make sure that you do that early on and that you plan for it early on. Because I guarantee you, as things start to happen, it's going to be harder to come back and try to capture those things. Now, you might not have enough physical redevelopment to need upgrades to sewer, upgrades to water, but you're certainly going to need updates to streetscape, transportation, calming mechanisms, and some other things. So, I'd urge you to plan for that early and put it in your plan. If it's going to be a PAD or it's going to have an overlay element to it, kind of like this vision plan is, there's no reason that you can't put that in there. I think it's great to have one document, even if it's not the zoning document, that you can hand someone. When someone comes in and says, I want to develop in Fountain Hills Town Center, there should be one piece of paper, one document that you can give them to say, here's how you would go about doing it. Instead of pointing to, and we do it in all the governments, pointing to 6 sections of 8 different codes, and then here's the design guideline and this. It's great to be able to give something to someone to say, here are the rules and how it works. The other thing I think is going to be important as part of this and going about it is to develop healthy public partnerships. We talked a lot today about targeted uses and users and the types of things that the community wants to see. And I'm speaking specifically for the government people. Unfortunately, you can't do that. You can't go out necessarily and incentivize one user to go in a spot as a government versus another. Because what you'll do is you'll get into this type of competition between, is it really fair for you, the government, to say, I'm going to give you tax breaks to go in here, but you, restaurant across the street, don't get anything, or down the road, or how to help those people compete. So really what you need is these healthy public-private partnerships that you're working with your Chamber of Commerce, you're working with your property owners, your business improvement districts, and most importantly, you're working with the people who are already here on the ground, your retail users. I've heard a lot of talk about maybe people moving to different areas, and I think that's great. Make sure that there's some type of process to do that and that everyone's included in it. Because once you pick one to help, the floodgates are opened. And so although we heard a lot of talk this morning about a catalytic project, this idea of one to focus on, and that's absolutely the right way to go because you have to start somewhere. Make sure that when you help that catalytic project out, you do it with a larger outlook on how you want to interact with the rest of the projects. The other thing that I think is important based on what I saw is make sure that you build in flexibility for yourself in this document. We all want to know what's going to happen, but none of us can really plan how it's going to happen. And often what happens, if you do it, especially in your land use code, if it's a section like it is now, this town center, I always get it wrong, is it TCCD? So the TCCD section, is tied to the rest of your land use code. And if you keep it in there, not that there's anything wrong with that, like I said, it's one of the 3 ways you see it. Remember that it's always going to be tied to different things that change in that code, and you always have to be aware of it. For me personally, I like in areas that I'm trying to pay special attention to, I like the idea of separating the document out. I like the one planned area development document. That way I can monitor and maintain that document, and so can other people, without keeping it totally in relationship to my zoning code and the rest of my land use code, because what happens in this area is special in compared to what's happening in other areas of the town, and it's going to be different. How you're going to want to treat one thing are not necessarily the same as the other. So it's not to say that you can't, but it's just something to think about keeping them separate and who rules and where is it silent. And, so those are my just preliminary observations. That, and, obviously, I think we mentioned it before, I like to see design standards. But incentivize the things that you want to see, do it in the document, provide flexibility, be transparent and clear, and whatever you're trying to accomplish, make that the easiest path for anyone who wants to come in and build. And I think that those are the most important things.
And I might ask the rest of the panelists about any best practices that you might identify in the course of doing your work, or if you care to, some difficulties, names excluded, of course, where what wanted to happen just couldn't because of an accidental byproduct of regulation. But can you give some examples of things you were trying to do that were necessarily encouraged in the course of getting those jobs done, and things you'd like to remind us that are positive, and those that are difficult?
Well, I'll start by saying my favorite, if you want to look at a government who did a redevelopment plan that was both clear and flexible. I always tell people to look at Albuquerque's redevelopment plan. I think it's a great plan about how they went about designating what they wanted to see and creating those paths to get there, including as going as far, and I'm not suggesting you do this because it's difficult, of guaranteeing time frames of review. Wouldn't everyone like to see this idea of your application gets accepted and 60 days later you're going to get your building permit? And they went that far and did that. And that's a partnership to me. So I tell people that's an interesting plan to look at.
And by the way, when I was in L.A., I mentioned this at the beginning, the mayor of Albuquerque was there. And what did he bring to us for our review? A former, you may know it, train repair yard.
Right.
Which they imagined, which is near their convention center.
Right.
They imagined all kinds of uses. And the mayor is being very proactive about encouraging people to think out of the box for what this could be, working very carefully with the neighborhoods next door, but he is prepared to lower the barriers to entry to get somebody to come in and say, this will happen because it's for the good of the city. He sees it that way. And you need somebody at the top who's prepared to sort of take those kind of issues on. Andy.
Also, the other day when I was talking to the mayor, he was talking about in the bundle of municipal services that might be offered, that there's a fairly narrow bundle here. So you have to be really certain, and perhaps you already know the answer to these things, that the water people have sufficient water to what you want to do, that APS or whoever the service provider out here has what you want. Because as it turned out on a major project I was working on downtown Phoenix, they had insufficient electrical capacity to my building. We had to pay for relocation of a major trunk line 8 city blocks to bring electricity to a building in the 5th largest city in America. So just be sure that you're in sync and look forward looking with regard to the utilities and what you want to do at this particular place. It may already be in place, but verify if you're not certain.
I would also kind of just echo that in an example that we did in a city, I won't mention names, but basically talking briefly with the mayor at lunch, he said what they don't want to have is, and to echo with what you're saying as well, is have a bad experience in a development and not wanting to go back to that community and develop again. And I can tell you that I won't go back to this community and develop again because we were developing a really small build-to-suit office on a hard corner, and they had divided up this parcel, and in doing so, they left all of the responsibility on the hard corner. It was an acre site. We were building a 17,000 square foot building, and they literally wanted to, impose on us, in addition to the setbacks on two sides that they wanted us to relocate streetlights and a traffic change light and power lines, and it basically just made the project not feasible for such a small scale project. And we were banging our heads against the wall because they were giving us no alternative option, but yet it was a parcel that was sitting undeveloped. All of the community was saying they want to see something there. They're tired of seeing this piece just sit as a dirt lot, and many people before us had come and tried to look at the piece but couldn't get it done. And what they proposed as an option was that we pay for the cost to do these improvements, and then we can submit for reimbursement, and maybe we would get reimbursed. Well, there's no guarantee there, and it just doesn't make sense. So we literally had to just take the time to take it up the chain, of command, till we met with the general manager and simply said, you're not making this developer friendly, and the community wants this. How can we work this out? We can't obviously add in turning lanes when you have it projected for 2030, and you want us to do it now.
Make a couple comments on retail processing through a regulatory environment. I'm a big believer that probably the most expensive part of the entitlement process for at least projects I've been involved with has been public hearings. They're both expensive and oftentimes time-consuming. I have traditionally been much more satisfied when there's a good relationship between a council and the different boards that hear cases and the staff. And when you recognize that you've got a good staff and a good town manager in place, I like the opportunity of having a lot of the details really worked out at the staff level and not repeated trips back through a public hearing process. In retail, where the actual tenant ends up driving so much of not just the footprint, but the actual storefront, and a lot of times these days, retailers, a lot of their presentation to the public is part of their brand. It's almost impossible for a retail developer to deliver what the building's going to look like early on at the entitlement zoning phase. And so many cities these days don't want to grant zoning without some hard, specific site plan with specific conformity to that site plan. And it just sets the stage for hearing after hearing after hearing. And I really think that zoning and site planning need to be set aside with very general ideas for retail, and then as the retailers are attracted and secured, and you start to get an understanding of the type of branding and vision that they'll put forth to the public. If you trust your staff, that's where those details can be worked out. And I really don't believe individual tenants and the impact on footprints and colors needs to go back through a full public review process. So again, I'd try and empower your staff, hire good staff, and then trust that they will help deliver that vision by working directly with developers and users.
I think that was one of your initial points about levels of predictability. Mm-hmm. You can't write into the code what the outcome is going to be. And in fact, you may, talk about disincentivizing, you may actually miss some great architecture, some great placemaking, some great programs because you didn't imagine that those things were possible. And somebody may come forward with a very inventive and viable proposal that if your staff, as Dave's pointing out, is on the ball, will see the value of that. Nothing they could have predicted would have happened, but still was in the general guidelines.
Right. Yeah, and again, we always wish there was an easy answer with this. It's just whatever you're going to do, build that flexibility in for yourself, that you can help yourself make good decisions when you can't foresee that decision when you write the code right now. We always wish, and there's not a code that I've worked on. Even the last one I wrote, which was an infill incentive district in Tucson, it wasn't 6 months later that we didn't look back and say, we didn't see this element. Now we have to go back and fix that. And by the time we went back through our own process, of our committees, and then the planning commission, and then up to the council, and then sent back to planning commission, by the time that we did that, there was at least one project that died because it needed that infill incentive district to get that administrative variance through, and it wasn't able to because we couldn't even go back and amend our own code in an efficient time frame. And so, it's tough to plan it all up front, but the more you can do, the more of the work you can do. I saw was it the land use, no, it was the analysis that you did on your land here. It was land use, right, based? That type of work that you've already done, I think is critical when you look at this plan and how you're going to go forward. If you can go through a similar exercise like that in your visioning plan and figure out, whether or not you're going to need turn bays or certain things like that, and actually turn that into a capital improvement plan of some type that needs to be updated, but the more of that you can do up front, the better off you are down the line.
Andy?
There are also some functional things you can do too, because for instance, in the City of Phoenix code, my recollection is for mixed use projects where you have retail on the ground level and housing up above. It's mandated that not only do you have two dumpsters, but they have to have their own turning radiuses in their own locations, in their own discrete locations. So it almost kills the opportunity just based on that, when in fact they might be able to share. I mean, there are functional ways to solve that in a more efficient way to allow the deal to go forward.
Mm-hmm. How about some even more particularized views of this place and what they're trying to do in the town center and regulatory activity? I think Bob mentioned one to you, Jared. I'm forgetting now what it was, but the question was the whatever you'd put in place. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the issue. Was it actually helping or hurting? Do you recall that conversation?
It was that we were talking about the actual land use code and that Title 18 in there on
yes,
the TCCD,
right.
And it's again it's a personal opinion thing. I really believe that for something like this, something this special and segregated, what you've started to put together in the vision plan is great, but I really think you have to go the next level and say that, are we going to have this in Title 18 in here? Are we going to have it as part of our land use code connected to the rest? Or do we want to separate it out into its own planned area development? And, for me, I think you're better off doing it as a planned area development. Doesn't mean you can't do it that way. And the reason is because, again, the rest of the code is really looking at this community in a different way on what you're trying to create. And so I think you need to separate them out. I think there'll be some difficulties coming down the line. There's some great things in this code. The idea that a town of this size has any type of shared parking requirements is great, because I'll tell you, there are larger municipalities out here that don't have that and need that to pull off some of these things. Now, for me, I'd want you to go even further. Allow people to come in with individual parking plans. If they can come in and show you that they can park their project even better than your code, you should allow them to. Let them show you that. And because parking in your town center, I don't think is going to be an issue right now. I think that there's plenty of parking. And the other thing about parking there is, I saw in one of the elements it talked about a parking structure. And I don't want to say that there won't be a parking structure, because we all like parking structures, but understand that the cash flow of a parking structure in Arizona is tough. The cash flow of a parking structure in the suburbs of Arizona is really tough. The cash flow of one parking structure in the middle of a sea of surface-free parking out on the edge is impossible. Now, that doesn't mean that one day it might not make sense, but don't limit yourself totally saying that we're eventually going to have that. And if you are going to do that, then start planning for it, from your capital side right now. Instead of saying, hey, I'm going to give you in lieu parking variances, charge people for that. Start a fund, collect something. Start to do the capital planning. So maybe it is 10 years until you build your garage, but start planning for it now financially.
But if the town center of Fountain Hills has a parking structure, something good has happened.
Something great has happened.
That means that your parking is full, and I would go even further than planning just for the parking structure. If you looked at all of your parking, and we drove around in it on Monday, how much could you accommodate, and I mean this in a positive way, on the street, and diagonally or otherwise, because parking on the street when full or close to full, which is a sweet spot of about 10% vacancy, that's where you really want to be. That says this place is hopping and I could be part of it. When it's always full and you got to drive around too often, then people leave. And if it's all empty, as it probably is right now as I drove around, that's not a good sign either. But if your streets look like they're full of cars, that means your businesses appear to be and probably are thriving, which may ultimately mean you need a garage at some point.
Right.
Robert.
Yeah. First of all, I love the idea of a sinking fund for a garage, number one. And number two is if I really put my visionary hat on, what I see happening is on Avenue of the Fountain, I see, again, 80% of that GLA going to something else other than retail, which means there's liner retail on the street, there's probably residential above it or hospitality adjacent to it or whatever, that is those other uses other than retail are self-parking on the site. So that what leaves retail then with a 60 to 90 foot depth, whatever you're going to do on the street, it's got surface parking only. Mm-hmm. And it would be great to have a code allowing the developer to basically self-park everything on the site except for the retail, and then pay a fee in lieu for a sinking cost for garage. So there could be some public field of parking that may be surface early on that go to structure later, but the developer is self-parking the other mixed uses on his site, but not the retail. Mm-hmm. And the retail now is enjoying a public domain for parking, whether that be street parking or future parking garage or an interim surface parking situation. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, if that street has that kind of GLA, and I've not done the math, if you don't take all 2,000 feet, take 800 or 1,000 or 1,200 linear feet times, the 60-foot depth or whatever, and with some holes in that, what does that mean in terms of total GLA for the retail? Park it at 3 or 4 to 1, and if it's restaurants, you're probably at 5 to 1 during peak. Mm-hmm. What is that parking demand? You're certainly not going to fill it by the street parking alone. And the way to be competitive against a traditional retail project where they enjoy the big fields of parking that have no character or soul, but they're there, is to make sure adequate parking is there within a short distance for people to come in and enjoy it.
Mm-hmm. Anyone who hasn't weighed in on things that you've witnessed that have inhibited or accelerated a project by the way that the city or town helped you?
I know that we're doing some adaptive redevelopment and entitlement work in city of Phoenix, and one of the frustrating things is the disconnect. I mean, there's high up, there's a feeling they want adaptive reuse and redevelopment and infill, and they even, promote programs. But then when you get into it, it's so inflexible, and you're 150 square feet off of their black and white box. It makes it really difficult. On top of that, you get into this and you're dealing with old zoning ordinances that are sort of I understand that it ties their hands, and they throws the developer into very costly improvements they weren't anticipating. And in our particular case, we're dealing with tiny projects. We don't have the benefit or the economy of scale to absorb some of that cost. So it takes time, it takes political maneuvering, and it makes it really difficult. And I can see why a ton of projects die, because it just doesn't make sense. Mm-hmm. So I was telling the mayor today at lunch, one of the other frustrations that we've had is that that disconnect. I think one of the recommendations I'd make to Fountain Hills is it's got to start from top down. Whether you're a mayor, a director, or you're working an intake desk, the mentality needs to be, how can we make this happen? There's got to be, I think, holistic buy-in into this vision, and that's going to be the challenge. Is everyone's going to be working together to help you get this project done. Constantly, I hear other developers saying it's just constantly, we're always being told why it can't be done. And all we're really trying to do is help. And it'd be nice to be such a differentiating point to market for this town if that was the mindset here. And I'll tell you what, you'll attract a lot of creative people to come to your city and do great projects. So.
Yeah, if you can just get your code to answer the question instead of why you can't do something, how you can do something, then it makes all the difference.
Well, I think the other side of this regulation is to try and come up with some tools that we can encourage the city to use. I know there's been some talk, at least lunch, about incentives. I know we've got some restrictions in our Constitution here about city dollars being used for anything other than city benefits, city infrastructure. There's probably some creative ways to combine the two. There's probably I know you talked earlier about business improvement districts. Those end up being a great way to pool marketing dollars, to create character, to create some street architecture that isn't in a normal curb, gutter, sidewalk type of a situation. So I think there's some creativity that can be used in a BID. We talked a little bit at lunch about these 4 big parking lots that sit inside the 208, I think, is that what it's called,
That's
208 tract. It may be that is land that's waiting to be harvested. It might be in a very cheap price if it's owned by some sort of an association. That maybe you can get your hands on that land and use that to create an incentive for some uses that you want to come that otherwise can't work on more expensive land. It may be that helps drive parking back out onto the street, or you preserve one of those areas for a structure and look for ways to put some of that other land into use. So I'd love it if anybody else had some ideas. We should make sure we all speak about other ways to just encourage or incentivize some creativity in these downtown districts.
And have any of you encountered, if you will, a downtown area like that one? And I know there's some physical examples. We talked about one near Shea and Tatum today, but we've got that many owners, and how you can come to a collective agreement about what needs to be done. What it's not a regulation in this case; it's some sort of structure. And I understand those folks have some sort of body that unites them, so they can look after each other's interests as a commercial area. But how do you get from what you were just describing, Dave, from where they are now to that? Are there any suggestions about how the group could behave?
Well, I think you've got to be able to, take maybe some of the results that come out of this process, as well as other processes that you've been through as a town, and build consensus amongst a group there. Obviously, that group's got some kind of a association that hopefully doesn't require unanimous approval, but I think if you can get buy-in and consensus that we're going to maintain adequate parking for everybody, but we're also going to try and use some of this, what would appear to be excess pavement, to just create drivers of activity and drivers of people, that I think you can paint a picture where everybody wins in that scenario. And if those aren't tracts of land owned by individuals where that person's be motivated by price only, and they're basically like landscape inside of an HOA where it's got no value other than you're paying taxes and water in it to keep it green. If those end up being parcels that in effect increase costs on those merchants, nobody's really using the parking, it could be relatively inexpensive way to land some of the anchors or uses that you're trying to attract. That beforehand we've talked about some of the values of the existing vacant tracts just might not be economically viable for some of those uses. So, I think, long answer, but I think you've got to paint a picture of everybody really is better off with some sort of a joint vision like that.
And this is where, when Robert or others brought up the term placemaking, and I think I reiterated what a serious matter that is. Some of the value we're attributing to parking is intangible, but I'm quite serious. When we think about beautiful little main streets, the cars are lined up diagonally, and it looks like everybody's attending the event. It's a busy place. So if you can convince those landowners that, yes, you may be 20 feet further from the door that you go into your business by parking on the street versus in the back, but if everybody does that, suddenly your whole area looks more vital. That hasn't really cost you very much, but the impression is, and perception is everything around some of these issues, that you're going to add value to where you are. And if they can look at some models and you measure the distances that proves that this gives a sense of inhabitation versus not, those goals are worth striving for. Mm-hmm. So unless there's anything else on regulation, I know we've given the audience some very generalized but very helpful points from Jaret's perspective and some examples from the panel here. I don't have any questions directly related to regulation up here. I've got some others that are very good that I'm going to bring up in a minute. But I know we're a little bit ahead of schedule, but if it's allowable, we might move on to the next topic. Any reason why we couldn't do that? All right?
Can I ask a question, too?
Yes.
Are there any, forget about the regulations allowing things, what about relegating? If you do have a division, you want that Main Street to be a retail street, is there requirements of having retail fronting the street?
You absolutely can write your zoning code to say that a certain percentage or the frontage has to be this, or you can even do it as far as I know in the one that we had in Tucson, that we actually wrote that there's requirements in certain areas to have so much of it window space on the bottom, not just retail uses.
Is that in place here now?
I don't think so. But this, I think, is why you were suggesting this project that you all asked us to look at is so particular relative to the rest of Fountain Hills. Segregate it out, as you've done, but even more so.
Even more so.
Yeah, move it out of the code generally and say things like that, which would not be applicable anywhere else. Nobody at their own house has to have a window of a certain size. But I can tell you, walking up and down, because we all do, this is what we do for a living, and we look at successful places. I could, and I took the pictures of them, buildings that by their very nature are not contributing to the life of Fountain Avenue.
Right.
They never will. They can't possibly, for example, lack enough transparency. Or you can't see the door. Or whatever it is. And so getting down to that placemaking particular grain really turns out to make a difference. And some of the little tiny venues that we've cited around here that work get those things right. I'm sure, in your project, Lorenzo, those things really matter.
They're huge.
Yeah, and this is where design really matters. I mean, you can link it to a pro forma, and the things are related.
And again, the other reason to separate is because, like we said, you want to treat things differently. I'll just give a specific example. You probably want people to have outdoor dining, right? And so you're probably going to have to give temporary revocable easements so people can use your sidewalk and your public space to have those tables and set up. Well, once you start that TRE system, if you have it in your land use code that you're allowing TREs, then what's to stop that from going on in other places? Now, I'm not saying that you might not want to allow them in other places, but those are the type of conflicts that happen when you just have it as a zoning district that might be difficult to deal with for what you'd want here versus what you'd want to see in other areas.
I think that's so critical. And the other thing is I noticed when we were taking the tours that the retail is there now that's south-facing, no shade structures.
Right.
I mean, that should be a mandatory requirement that if building's facing south with those storefronts, there is an adequate shade structure. And let the staff interpret what adequate is.
Right.
But if you want that street to live, you've got to give it some breathing room and give it a life.
At the risk of offending my fellow placemakers up here,
That's okay.
or maybe more placemaking than I'm gifted to do, I would say on the other side of the coin is don't go so far as to where you are forcing every single property owner to put in something that there's no demand for. And I can give you example after example, and I will use a name, like Boulder, Colorado, where through regulation they have tried to artificially stimulate the economy, and lo and behold, a few years later, they've got problems they never dreamed of, and they've just screwed things up. So
Dave,
you need to be careful
add a little
about
meat
that.
to the bone of that. I mean, an example would be what? A situation of unintended consequences.
Well, Boulder thought that the best way to keep from having all that traffic come up the Denver-Boulder Turnpike and come into their city and clog up their streets, the best way to deal with that was to reduce the parking requirement for all of their uses in town down to 1 to 2 spaces per 1,000, which is a third to a half of what you need. So they thought, well, if we just don't provide parking, people will stop clogging up our town. Well, now they've got retail throughout their town that does about half of the sales volumes that it should, because the people that would like to shop there can't find a place to park. And they were convinced that everybody would ride their bike to do their grocery shopping. It just, you can go way too far in trying to just create your own little world, and it backfires on you. Another thing Boulder did, they limited growth of their housing stock to 1% a year for the last 20 years. So you can only pull as many housing permits this year, 1% more, or 1% of your total housing stock each year. Well, within 10 years, they couldn't understand why housing was so expensive in Boulder, Colorado, and then that forced them to go force every developer that wanted to build housing to build a certain amount of affordable housing. So again, one little innocent idea leads to screwing up a natural equation that just brings 4 other problems. So you just have to really think forward of how those things can have ripple effects that nobody really wants to deal with.
And Dave, I agree with you 100%, and I think there's also what I see happening not only from cities but also from developers get wrapped around the axle. Is there in our world of retail? I call them retail 101 rules. Parking is a good example. How far are you away? How many spaces? And so there are some rules you can bend, others you just can't break at all, and you can't touch. And parking, as an example, is one of them.
And there's a question of the audience that probably is riddled with retail 101 issues. Signage, question, lighting question, live performance question, outdoor dining, which you already hit on. You probably want to incentivize that. Distance from street. And what you both are suggesting is attend to these issues. And you maybe want to incentivize more signing, because signing connotes activity. But have some flexibility in these. Once you start dictating, and I've seen that in cities as well, signage, actually downtown Phoenix suffers from this. It's really hard to do a decent sign without going through a lot of public hearings. But are any of these particularly lightning rods for you in the things that we're trying to draw here, which is an exciting, vibrant retail /
Well, to build off of something we heard earlier, trust and try and secure quality developers, good quality developers who have a relationship and are doing commerce with their tenants and are working together for a win-win approach to successful, enterprises. They're going to do the right thing for their tenants. They're going to want the right types of signage. They're going to want the right types of lighting, the right amounts of parking. So encourage your developers that you believe and trust in to take an active part in those decisions, because typically, retail is one of those few areas of real estate where the landlord and the tenant are really motivated to work together. And I think as a city or a town, find good developers, find good retailers, and let them do what they really know how to do best.
And it's interesting, a word like signage somehow can connote, I don't know why, negativity. Oh, it's going to be garish, it's going to be neon. Yet I can think of, and I mentioned Santa Barbara and some other places where the inventiveness around signing is what makes the street exciting and encourage inventiveness. Yeah, maybe there's a scale limit, sure, I understand, but encourage people to do that kind of stuff. Without getting back into the entertainment venue completely before we get on to tourism, one of the related questions here is, what are parking requirements for the entertainment venue, which will balloon at times and then shrink back to zero when there's nothing happening there? How have you managed the issue of parking, since it shows up in regulatory activity all the time with regard to big events?
Good question.
Reed.
That's a good question.
I don't know if I'm the best person to answer the parking aspect. That's finally something that
you just tell your people to park anywhere?
Yeah. That's more, to do with the design, the overall design. I'm more interior.
But you can imagine it's an issue. Let's say for Fountain Hills, you've got people for whom this is home, and if the streets are suddenly for an event really hard to get through, and or just the appearance is that we've turned all the streets into parking lots around the lake, that may be desirable if we knew it was for a spot event and it happens on a regular basis. We all know it's going to happen. You've probably had to overcome that in various places.
On the event side of things, when we're going into a market, a perfectly good is the Indian Steel Park. We go to Indian Steel Park. Mm-hmm. Everybody that comes to Indian Steel Park, we find the parking. We go out, we find what we need. We do it based on an average one per 200, a spot per 200 people. You figure there's 3 people. Depending on how many people are coming, an average is 3 people per car. And you're looking at the number of people you're planning, and then you know how many spots you need, and then you just work backwards. And again, like Indian Steel Park, they make you shuttle people in no matter what. You get the permits from the VA hospital, you get the permits from everybody. We walk the streets, we tell everybody in the neighborhood to the north that we're coming, and we block off the streets so people aren't parking in people's front yards and things like that, and we become great partners in that. But then again, the cost for renting the buses and to do the transportation ends up being another cost that a promoter has to eat, and it's another reason why we have done 1 or 2 events in Indian Steel Park in the last 4 years. It's a beautiful park, but it's just cost prohibitive, and parking is definitely an issue. And that's where, if you build parking in town, it makes it that much easier for us to be able to bring. What do you do when you do 200,000 people over a weekend for the art festival that happens in town here already? People are finding the parking for that, and that's usually what I go off of and say, it happens organically. They find a place to park, and hopefully the people aren't screaming too loudly, and if they are screaming, they're usually screaming at you guys, so you know who it is that we have to personally hold their hands.
And it's great, too, if you can link it with day uses. It looks like, if you're close to this municipal complex over here, this parking lot probably gets a lot of use in the day. But at night, it should be good parking for something like an entertainment venue if you can keep those close together, if you can match those up.
Somebody's provoking me to ask some of my favorite questions. I don't know. Maybe this came in from Milwaukee. Apparently we have an audience in Milwaukee today, by the way. Your wife's seeing us from Milwaukee, so shout out to Milwaukee. Should we narrow streets? And again, I want to be very careful here. We're not here to redesign the Swaback plan, the city plan, but this relates to the viability of some of these uses. So I asked the question in that sense. Should we narrow streets? Should we use a form-based code? Should we allow, and I think they're saying allowing height, which might mean additional height or things that are currently outside the current scope. And also there's a question about density. Because I think we've all talked about bringing a lot of energy to particular areas. Robert's ready for this.
No.
What do you think?
Well, what is the height limitation right now?
I think it's 30-some feet. 40. 40. How does 40 strike you relative to the ambitions of either that plan or what we've been describing?
I would find some areas that you can undulate. So maybe on an average it would be 40 or 45, but you could have some areas that would go to 60 and some that would go to 30, so that it actually didn't look uniform. Sometimes when you put a height limitation, everything in that neighborhood goes that same height, and then it becomes uniform and uninteresting. So I think you could look at an average height of 40 and probably be just fine with that. Density, I would be looking at the highest density you can get in the town in this core area only. Again, just as an anomaly to everything else. And if you look at the streets and you look at the length, I mean, they're not all perfect. Don't get me wrong. But I don't think it's worth the brain damage and the money to go ahead and start altercating that or altering that at all. I would just leave it the way it is.
The street.
Yeah, I would leave the streets the way it is. But I would also plan on a median at some point in time to be looking at bringing utilities in that median and seeing if that ever could be used for other uses other than just passive.
That's right.
Passive
It's
landscaping.
hard to imagine, but I know exactly what you're saying. And let's say the Avenue of the Fountain turns into what we imagine. It's really hopping on both sides. You could imagine a small wine bar, cafe, or something, believe it or not.
Wine bar is exactly what I
out
was
in the
thinking.
middle, in the boulevard, where the doors open up and then it closes.
Yep.
And that kind of stuff is sort of, again, hard to imagine at this point. But having just come from Chicago, where there would be a restaurant in a building and the waiters or waitresses would have to cross the sidewalk to service a table almost in the street, suggests that there were a lot of interest in dining. If you had people not on just two sides of your streets, but on the third and fourth side, boy, you've got something going on now.
And Santana Row in San Jose is a similar, it's
right.
not a little bit the same scale, but exact same thing where it was a little wine bar. It was a florist to start out, then it turned to being a wine bar.
But these are of the size, Lorenzo, that you would build. I mean,
totally.
projects. They're small jewel-like things that connote quality and authenticity. The things that we were talking about.
The little gems.
The only thing I'd add on that, rather than getting into changing infrastructure and all that, I would just probably be proactive a little bit and plant. I know we have a different climate here than other locations, but plant vegetation that would actually get some height and provide some shade relief early on now.
Yes.
To let that mature. So when development actually comes in, you actually have that kind of vegetation in place that it will add character to it.
Right. And by the way, I haven't done the calculations, but you could get someone to do it. The amount of additional temperature, and it's in a couple of degrees, that's being generated by all your black asphalt in between those buildings that's not parked on, is for real. In the Phoenix area, we have raised the nighttime temperature, and partly it's because of the amount of asphalt we use, which is sometimes in excess. Turn that into vegetation and really shade your sidewalks, and you will. The temperature only has to get about to 105, 106, and shade's very tolerable. You would get a lot more of this activity you're looking for. I think the height question also is critical. To have some sort of variegation with regard to the height of buildings, you can zone or code or regulate to a specific height and wind up with a pancake city. And most of the authentic cities we look at don't have that.
And that's great if you're Washington, D.C., because the buildings are beautiful, but it's not that happens very rarely anywhere else that it looks nice.
And that was also done to make sure that the key monuments stood up
Still
above those buildings.
above everybody else.
That's your fountain, I guess.
Yeah.
When someone talks about height in Arizona, it kind of pinches the back of my arm because I get so frustrated. Having been here for 13, 14 years, but coming from San Francisco, I love the skyscraper. I deplore the scarring of the mountains, and it seems so inconsistent to restrict height, but allow scarring of the vegetation and the mountains. If it's an either or. But I've never been able to figure out on the municipality side of the greater Phoenix area why we can scar but we can't go high. I always thought the reason you don't get high so you don't block views. But you'd think you'd want to keep the views.
Right. So to bring this to a degree of closure, and I know Jaret has another appointment that's just come up, so he's going to have to leave us, to ask Gene to list some of the highlights of discussion of regulation and or other topics that we've covered here. Your top 3 or 4 would be what?
3 or 4, that's it. No, for me, it's to build flexibility into your document while at the same time being as clear and concise as possible when it comes to process. Here's how you need to get there, but building in that flexibility for your users.
And you'd believe that a document, I like your one-page idea. As difficult as that is to do, it's a great exercise. Here's generally how to do it, is a great thought. But also a document that really relates to this area.
Right.
Exclusive and in tandem with the general regulations for the city.
Right.
But I think at the same time, I heard Mr. Scholl say, don't overdo it.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think the first statement I started off with is it's true. There's this inverse relationship to the size of your code and your success. I mean, I can't document it. I wish I could. If someone wants to fund it, I'll have my graduate students study it. But the larger that code gets, the harder it's going to be to deal with. And over time, you'll keep adding things to it that start to conflict, and it happens to all of us.
Yeah. I heard trust your planners.
I didn't hear that. I heard trust your manager.
Staff.
Staff.
Empowering.
Okay, let's include everybody.
Empower your staff.
Yes.
I think it's get good staff and empower them to execute.
Absolutely.
And there needs to be I think there needs to be a spirit within City Hall of being creative and saying, not early on saying no to some tools. All those tools that you can come up with. I think you should try and formalize the tools that can help incentivize things, and then don't eliminate any. Have them all in the toolbox and use them when you need them.
Anything else we want to add to that? We can do a little bit more at the very end. If not, we'll consider that one cooked for at least a little bit, and we'll move on to the last topic of the day, which is tourism, which we ventured into that territory a bit, thanks to Reed's prompting about the venue, which we expected. But as I understand it, and there are many reasons for this to be believed, there's a lot of good reason why you should imagine tourism as being a driver of all kinds of positive things in Fountain Hills. I know many even members of the panel here are cyclists and come through Fountain Hills, so tourists of a sort. You've got golf courses, you've got a couple of resorts here. Again, for those people coming from the Midwest or elsewhere where the climate isn't anything like this place, tourism surely has to be top of mind when thinking about Fountain Hills. So we want to talk about, and I understand the Tourism Bureau, or whatever the appropriate name is for in Fountain Hills, is very interested in what we might have to say about that. I think I left this as a group topic. We didn't assign anybody in particular to launch it, but I think Reed has gotten us started this morning when talking about the entertainment venue. Items that could be, and maybe this is related to what we said about retail, we said about housing, we said a little bit about office, and now even events. What's the focus? What's the thematic? What it is that you do here that you don't do elsewhere? I'd like to open up the panel. If we want to incentivize tourism at whatever scale, you think about what that is. What would those drivers be? What would you first start exploring for tourism?
Well, we heard the mayor at lunch talk about this sort of ongoing relationship with the Native American community next door, and I think as they continue to invest in infrastructure, whether that's destinations for golf or gaming or just simple ballroom space, the connections that could occur, whether they're recreational in the way that there's trails, whether there's a way to play off of that with secondary destinations. I know a lot of times individual hotels get overbooked and you need overflow. You could also try and diversify and add a product that goes way up from what the big hospitality destination is, or goes way down and tries to pick off a sliver of the gambit of people that are going to the big hotel out on the community out there. But I think that's worth pursuing. I think there's an opportunity between the recreational, the gaming, possibly the golf. We talked earlier about maybe a health and wellness focus, but it seems to me that there's an opportunity not too far outside your boundaries that could be worth exploring and could grow into something.
There's a question that relates exactly to the first issue you brought up, Dave. The question reminds us that Fountain Hills has a northern boundary that's shared with the Fort McDowell Reservation, which already has one hotel and a casino, but also plans another. It's also talking to some potential retailers about some big box opportunities, mentions Costco or Home Depot or whatever it might be. Given the reservation's ability to negotiate concessionary leases, it can compete or outcompete the town economically if it chooses. What are your thoughts on this potential threat and or partnership, which I think is the key to turn a threat around to a partnership, and I think that's what you're leading to, with the reservation? So you're talking about doing not what they do, but something that augments that in some way.
Complement, I think it's difficult for Native American communities to have for sale housing, so there may be an opportunity, close by if that catches on and it ends up being a big destination for nightly stays, maybe fractional ownership works better in Fountain Hills than it does on the Native community. It may be that condo hotel works better because of that ownership provision that works better in Fountain Hills than it does out there. I think I would look for the things that they're going to do best and stay away from them, but look at the constraints they have and try and encourage those opportunities to make the trip down the street and come into your community to do the stuff that you compete with better.
Now, one of the councilmen and I were chatting about chicken and egg scenarios. Could have to do with the entertainment venue or a variety of other things. How much do you have to do to authentically, using that word again, back up what you're trying to cause people to come here to do? And how much can you just begin marketing, saying, well, you come to Fountain Hills, it's a wonderful place? What the tribes are putting in certain things. If we were to talk about issues of recreation, not ecotourism, but certainly green topics have come up, the arts. So given what the town has right now, how would you think about what you need to put in place to make certain things go even more so than they currently are now? And then how would you market those things to accelerate tourism? We drove around the town. We saw a lot of empty lots. We saw a lot of potential. How would you begin this tourism issue?
We also talked at lunch about a 4th of July festival. The town's talking about getting back into the 4th of July. I guess it hasn't done it for a while. I guess the height of the fireworks. So it's all about how you package it. And I would, instead of worrying about money, I'd go to every radio station, find out which one doesn't have a partner, bring the radio station on board, let them become a partner, have them go sell sponsorship for you, and make it the best darn low fireworks show. I remember going to maybe SeaWorld as a kid or one of these places, and everything was low. It was like these wheels and spinning, and it wasn't stuff just being shot in the air. Create the world's greatest low fireworks show, or it doesn't even have to be that much about money. It could be an inexpensive show. I do many different fireworks shows at the 4th of July time period. I tie them all in exactly what I'm saying. The city of Tucson, they don't spend any money on their fireworks show. I go down, I produce it with Kim Country. Kim Country, we bring in 2 or 3 artists. They go out and bring in 4 or 5 sponsors. The sponsors pay for the fireworks display, and we just work together as a partnership. We did this year. We did about 7,000 people with 3 bands on a Saturday, and the revenue of the event was about $160,000, and the expenses were about $106,000. So it was a win-win for everybody, and everybody was happy, and it happens organically. And that's how, instead of sitting there and thinking you need to throw stuff at it, you got to grow. You got to start small, but you've got to also put on a great product, because if somebody's going to come here and walk in and see 2 little pop-up tents and a guy sitting there and that's your festival, they're not coming back. So you got to make sure that what people are doing are going to represent what you want to have done, so that when they come, they go, I had a great time, and the next time 10 more vendors come on board, and the people have that much better of a time. And then based on what you were saying, for the casino, their main goal is getting people through their doors. We all know what they're in business for. And they do a lot of things that are loss leader activities to get people to come out there hoping that they're going to get a residual from that. Create busing from here. Everybody come into Fountain Hills, come to dinner, start marketing your town, and hey, there's a bus. You can go right over to Fort McDowell for a couple of hours, come back, and go to, so where you are a great partner. I mean, right now, the whole thing is the rapid transit. Go to Mesa, go to Tempe, you can go downtown. They're making it easy for people on this new metro to do it. Create your own. I mean, I don't know if you have that already, you might, but maybe there's a bus or something you can do to get people back and forth, which shows them that you're trying to be a good partner, trying to help have people go to the casino and utilize that incredible entertainment resource if that's your thing.
You reminded me of something when you say organically allow things to happen. I would encourage people to go to a site called on the internet called Waterfire in Providence, Rhode Island. It began as an artist, Barnaby Evans, with some of his students, teaching at the Rhode Island School of Design, making small little bonfires on the Providence River, and they did it simply as an art piece.
You said it beautifully at lunch. You're talking about Stockton, I think, and
another place. Right.
You're talking about Stockton, and there's 200,000 people, lots of music, lots of everything going on, jam-packed festival, people having a wonderful time. And he goes, "What do you think the festival was?" It was the Asparagus Festival. You can make an event as long as it's a place for people to go for a few hours. They were talking about an amethyst mine that I guess you can come to Fountain Hills, jump on a helicopter, and go see the amethyst mine. My gosh, look at Tempe has the largest, gem show in the nation. There's no reason. You got an amethyst mine, do a rockhound show, create something around the amethyst mine, and have people come here to experience it. And it's organic. It happens. It's right in your backyard, and yet it'd be an easy way to start educating. I have an 8-year-old daughter who loves going out, finding places, collecting rocks, and then putting them in those little tumblers. So I could see that being something when your kids are telling you to do it, you're going to go. And those are the things. Those are the easiest fixes, is to do what you have here and find a way to start it, and start 1, and then start 2, and then start 3, and before you know it, every weekend, Telluride, Colorado, every weekend has a festival.
Well, now in Providence, not every weekend, but almost, and you'll see the schedule on the website, they light these fires. Mm-hmm. Because then some people on gondolas started weaving down the river because so many people were coming down just to see the fires. Next thing you knew, the mayor will like this. There's the mayor on a boat waving to everybody as if it was his idea. So you should do that too. But that has turned into a major industry, and all it began with was somebody building a $5 fire. And now there's music, entertainment, and 100,000 people will come to downtown Providence. Could you imagine if you had a little entertainment on the water, how many people would spread out a blanket on your grass and spend money in the town on all kinds of things? It may be that modest at the beginning, so you're keeping your infrastructure costs low, but your cultural value or community value high.
Yeah, you look at the Railroad Park right in Scott. You go there on a Thursday night when they're doing the entertainment in the summer, and it is jam-packed with people. You can't find a parking spot. You can't get near it. It's just, again, another way for people to go out for free, fun entertainment to give an added value to their kids, and that's what they're looking for at this time, right now, especially with this kind of an economy.
We talked a little bit about how some of those type of venues, they're really just grassroots marketing. Stillman Park isn't out buying advertising that they're hosting these events. They're just kind of word of mouth, if you will. And so we talked about over lunch again, one of the theories of how to bring more of the local community out here. And I love Robert's idea of reversing that perception that you're in bringing people here. Like when I have visitors come in from out of town, we usually want to take them to Sedona or show them something that's Arizona. Right. But if you don't have 3 hours to drive to Sedona, why not drive 45 minutes to Fountain Hills and reverse that perception? One of the things growing up here as a native that I know was really neat to us when we were younger was watching the hot air balloons. And I was talking with the mayor about maybe that's something, another idea of something you could pursue, where if you bring a hot air balloon event here, it's like a sign in the sky. People see the hot air balloons, they want to know what's going on, where is it coming from, where is its access. And that's another grassroots marketing, if you will, without having to spend advertising dollars. But how do you get some of the community from Scottsdale or Tempe or Mesa to come and start experiencing, utilizing Fountain Hills so that then they can tell 10 friends who tell 10 friends? It's really trying to figure out how do you get that grassroots.
Do we think that for Fountain Hills, we're just north of the most western town, or if I think of Albuquerque, I think of the balloons, because they do that frequently enough that you've become to see Albuquerque with the balloons in the background. They certainly market it that way. Or maybe some of the festivals that Reed brought up. Should Fountain Hills go after a thematic way of branding itself for tourism that lasts all year round? Or should it just have something great every weekend, but it's diverse? And part of it's cycling, part of it's looking at the mountains, part of it's water related. I mean, how far would you go one way or the other if you were the head of tourism here? Do I need to find some all-encompassing theme for the city, or just do a good job at things at all scales on a weekly, monthly, and annual basis?
I definitely think if it's diverse, you're just going to get more of a crowd. I mean, you may have somebody who one weekend wants to come to a jazz festival, and the next weekend you have a triathlon. Yeah. You're getting a totally different crowd each time from different events.
And the only reason I mention that, using my water fire example, it's still fire, the same fire we've all been looking at, apparently, as humans for millennia. Yet people keep coming back, and it's a must-see event because you don't know what the ancillary entertainment is, but you know you always see a crowd and you'll get to see something. So I think your answer is right, and you've got to mix something new in there. But it would be nice to be always knowing, even if you didn't research it heavily, that if you went to Fountain Hills on a Friday night during the best times of the year, you're always going to see something great. Friday night is just simply the night to be in Fountain Hills. And I don't know if that's tourism. Yeah. Tourism might be it's a kind of tourism. But what do you think about the next level? What should we heard triathlon, and Reed has an idea for a velodrome, which I do want to probe a little bit. Mm-hmm. I mean, what if we went to the next level? What would those things that everybody would know, like the Boston Marathon, if you will? You know Boston for that event, amongst other things. Should there be that kind of a thing from a tourism point of view in Fountain Hills?
You got to look at it a little different. I mean, you have the Rock and Roll Marathon that's happening now. Mm-hmm. They've got 22 of them now across the country. They're doing marathons. Well, it's only so many people can run a marathon. They're finding people go once, but they are doing 30,000 people at each one of these, and the economic impact to a city are huge. So create the most special half marathon, or the most special 5K, or the most special some other way, or create an exercise day for your kids. Everybody, bring your kids out. Every school's involved at some time during the day, and have the kids actually do some kind of an exercise towards an activity. It's fun, and it just ties right back into the community, and that's what makes people have ownership of your community, and what makes people want to talk about it and want to be here.
But we've got at least 3, probably 4 cyclists, maybe more, on this panel right now. Mm-hmm. Who probably have very expensive bikes and people who sell very expensive bikes. And Fountain Hills is one of those places where you want to ride. Mm-hmm. You've already got something going here. So what if you were to advance that a bit? Do we think that's a good idea? I mean, I'm actually taking your velodrome idea, which if the audience hadn't heard it, what if you were to create an indoor venue that really said Fountain Hills is the place to come? It doesn't even
need to. In Cal State Dominguez Hills, they did it outdoors. And you know what? They used it for concerts when it wasn't being used for a velodrome. It is huge, and I know a group of people in Tucson, and we just took them out to Wild Horse Pass, to the Gila River Nation, and looking at their old buildings to try and move into there, because they're trying to figure out what to do with the old casino and some of their old properties. These people want to come, and they're also now we're looking at doing the race at the new Diamondback Stadium. The new spring training Diamondback Stadium is looking to program that now. You've got 8 beautiful fields that are going to be used for 1 month out of the year, and they're looking to program. It's an idea that keeps coming to me, and this group came to me, and I've taken them over there. This is a perfect...
I don't associate any of those places with cycling like I do with Fountain Hills.
Right. That's why this is the perfect natural. It just makes sense. People go to McDowell Mountain Ranch. It's the one place I can't tell you how many times I've come and ridden my bike at McDowell Mountain Ranch on this side. It just makes sense to do a beautiful velodrome and have the lifestyle, and target the lifestyle that you guys already live, and the privacy and it's close enough, but you guys feel like a million miles away. And I think that's why a lot of people live here as well, to keep us out.
Danny, you had a thought?
I wish.
It's getting late in the day. You got to come up with one pretty soon.
I live with this committee in my head, and the committee that's talking to me right now. I got 5 or 6 board members up there, and one's saying tourism, another one's saying no tourism. And the longer I sit here, the more I see an elephant in the room that I have a dozen or so friends true friends that live in Fountain Hills that have a consistent articulation of why they live in Fountain Hills, which would, their reasons to live in Fountain Hills violate even using the word tourism. When I was in college, in that they're here to get away from everything. They don't want it to come here. That's why they moved here. That's why some of you probably live here. When I was in college in a very distorted, surreal time,
That's all we really need to hear about that.
I sat at the University of San Francisco and in a group that was about this size, and I was making sure I was right on the front row. I really like you. You've been on morning and right on the front row to listen to Stokely Carmichael. What a privilege to hear someone that is so different than me, so far from me, so not like me, to say something that struck a chord and grabbed my heart that all these years later, I can sit here and tell you what Stokely said, and it was right, and it's right for you, and it's right for me today. Words are not powerful. Words are just tools. The power is not in the word. The power is in the definition. So tourism, what is the definition of tourism? And it goes back to meeting after meeting after meeting that I have the privilege and sometimes obligation to sit in, where people start out with a topic of what is it? And Duke, you've been doing a phenomenal job of keeping the what, and the how. But we have a session on what is it? And before we know it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people start talking about the how. And we don't even know what the what is. Mm-hmm. What is tourism? How are we going to do it? I'm sitting here with a new friend that has known my daughter, and we got some great symbiotic history that's been cool, it has an incredible mind. I don't know what tourism is for Fountain Hills. I do know a guy like Reed would be invaluable to sit with a core of people and define the what, like he's doing, just like you just push on him and it just pops out. When you squeeze him, what he really is comes out. And whatever it is needs to include those people that had a defined reason that they moved to Fountain Hills, not to the community afar that you're trying to get to come here.
Yeah.
Because there will always be a conflict in this community. There's going to be a conflict like there is in life, like there is in art and science, like there is in haves and have-nots, like there's those that want energy and those that want quiet. There will always be a conflict, and conflict is just always a millimeter away from enmeshment, if commerce is a part of it, where it's a win-win. And that's an easy esoterical thing to say, and it's a passionate thing to chase. It's damn hard to implement. But what is tourism? It shouldn't be something that kills the spirit and the heart of what was germinated out when Fountain Hills was born. It should complement it. It should enhance it. And that's what I like the things that Reed's saying. Reed has not taken anything from afar to try to bring it in. And yet he's a promoter. Gosh, you're terrible at promoting. But you're very, very organic in what you do. So, definition. I don't think a city can spend too much time in a think tank of defining the words, because the power's in the definition, not the word. And then anyone and everyone can start to embrace at some level. So tourism, I hate it, and I love it. That's the committee going on. But for Fountain Hills, I think it has to be incredibly well defined. I want to revert back quickly to what was talking about a bedroom community. Let me tell you, there is no bedroom community anywhere, in my opinion, in the greater Phoenix area. And there's no CBD. It's just all one big suburbia. It's all suburbia. This happens to be a pocket, geographical pocket suburbia that is solidified by natural boundaries that will never let it be anything but that. You cannot build a bridge, a highway, an airport that will take away the fact that this is cool little rolling hills that are separate from, but connected to, other parts of this great mass sprawl called suburbia. Can never change that. So what are the things in it that are jewels that you can use for your community to have tourists, that they're the tourists, that they get to discover? Have the people that lived here finished exhausting their component of discovery of what this beautiful little hill community is? So for me, tourism, I don't know what it is, but I know in part there's a part of it that is discovery and experience for those that have chosen to live here. And I go back to the principle, it works for them. You keep evoluting it up to a higher quality, everyone else will want to come, and that's the marketing plan for it. But I don't know what it is.
You said something really interesting.
I did. I really did.
Yeah. Which is why you're going to head up the Community Education Center here in Fountain Hills. We're leaving him behind for all of you. He's your new dean, philosopher king. Now, if you think about this, and I don't know the origins of it, whoever said Park City and film goes together?
Yeah.
Right? But the reason that maybe we have dwelled a little bit more on the how rather than the what, and I like much more about the what, is if you walk up and down this Park City, the main street there, well, what did they have? One, they have these magnificent historic storefronts. They had the theaters, the Egyptian theater and others. And how can we take this apparent car we've got here, tune it up, and make it go really fast? But we can see what the thing is, the how. We have the street. What's different about Fountain Hills, I think, is as a lot of us have looked at those parking lots, or as was described on the tour, the missing teeth, the how isn't in evidence yet. The fountain's there, the water's there, that's why maybe we're focused on it. There's a bit of the how. So the what is a far more open question. Yeah. The existence of those movie theaters in Park City leads you to a certain answer. Here, the what is wide open. Now, we've gotten after cycling and arts and other things, but you could be a lot of things here, and maybe that's what makes this problem, in fact, more difficult. You haven't built those historic buildings that, of course, have to be reutilized, because you could redo much of downtown and turn it into something else. So I think you're asking exactly the right question, but the threads that will lead you to the answer aren't as much in evidence as they might be in Soho, which you brought up earlier. Those buildings aren't going away, so how do we reuse them? Here, you've got empty lots.
Yeah.
So the answering of the how, we should, maybe we need some more suggestions from the audience. If any of you know what the what ought to be, let us know, and we'll debate that in front of you.
I would like to insert the parking comment that I just restrained myself from making, but now I'm all fired up. The only parking problem is where there are no cars.
Yeah. You also, in the last time, one of the questions was about the width of the streets. The greatest gift you can have, if you want to create it as an event mecca in a place, is having width. If you start narrowing things up too much, it takes all the energy and sucks all the life out of everything. And the other thing, based on what he's saying, is 90% of what we're saying doesn't matter if it isn't what you want and what the owners of your businesses want, because it takes the owner of the businesses to make what we're talking about happen. It's all a partnership. It starts at the top with the mayor, with the city council, and everybody else here. And it just takes knowing that you're all in the boat rowing, and you can't make everybody happy, but at least you can respect them enough to make sure that those people, and I'm sure the mayor and the city council members can all tell us that every one of the guys who don't like what we're talking about have their phone number first and foremost, and they call them anytime anything comes to this town. And that's just the way it is in every city and in every town, and you just got to work with them and respect them.
Robert?
An adjunct to tourism to me is the branding side of it too.
Yeah.
And so I think some thought needs to go into the branding and who your audience is, what you want to accomplish out of that, and what you really want to spend doing it. Because you've got a lot of constituencies out there, in particular some of the Davids that Danny talked about earlier on, the entrepreneurial guys you want to have come in, and women, men and women to come in and establish their residency here and start a business. So there's a litany of constituencies I would just be addressing and be thinking very hard about how you want to brand Fountain Hills.
Right. I would encourage, whether it's Fountain Hills, and boy, you're dead on, Reed, about the questions we're talking about are what all towns and cities are having to deal with. And of course, there's always a fear of the unknown, what we don't currently have, and perceptions about it. And so I'm sure we haven't, none of this was in our material, we can just intuit it. Surely some people came to Fountain Hills, given its geographic location relative to the rest of Phoenix and the rest of the country, to sort of get away from it all. That has to be the case for some people here. And others are coming here because it's probably a great place to raise kids relative to what we know about your high school. Probably a good place to live, to be part of a business over by Kierland or whatever. So it's probably a mix of a lot of different observations about what this community has to be, some of which might appear to be in conflict. But I can tell you probably that fear is based on what we don't know is there. But if you put up the right venue, which suddenly offers another place, a better place to get that magical cup of coffee or see that performance or whatever, people say, wow, I didn't know it was going to be like that. That's different. I really like that. So I hope that in the course of all of you out there in the audience trying to realize that plan, that fear of what might be doesn't keep you from exploring all of these options, even something maybe as crazy as a velodrome, which could turn out to be beautiful, an attractor, a great place to have dinner while you watch people go around on a bicycle. Who would imagine that? I would really encourage some out-of-the-box thinking, given the availability of land and now time. Unfortunately, we've got time to think about this. You're not being pressed by a lot of developers saying, I really want to put this thing in the middle of your downtown, and I need to have an answer now. You've got the time to really think through what the what is. And that often isn't the case.
He's going to get a dictionary, and we'll have the definition of tourism before long.
It'll be a definition of tourism. It'll be unlike any other one you've ever heard.
No matter how many years he has to go back.
So, any last thoughts on tourism? Whatever the definition of it may be, or your own personal definition, how we might leave the folks here, and maybe we hit a couple of the highlights. I guess at the top I would put, define the what, all right? Both what is you want to do and what is tourism. Because I think if you had your streets on a Friday and Saturday night, Fountain Ave, filled with cars, and people sitting outside, that's a form of tourism. It's about drinks and food. But that's people coming to your place, and they will drive in this archipelago, as Andy described it, 40, 50 miles to have an authentic experience. So that's one layer of tourism. I think there's then the one that brings them in on a more irregular basis for the bigger event, the art festival or whatever. And then for your performance venue, I think that's the third layer where you're now really pulling out all the stops to draw in people who are not just local, but from further afield. But I don't know if that's, so I would say tourism has, what would you like to describe it? Layers of intensity. And the town really needs to figure out collectively what they would like to have.
Layers of intensity and partnership.
Yeah. You know, often tourism also has a champion. We've got bicycle riders here. You ride here. If somebody said, do you know what this could be? Do you know that we could offer, and I'm making this up, a pre-Olympic opportunity here where people, all eyes are on Fountain Hills while we watch people racing in the velodrome? That's because you all know bicycling. Somebody here may know of something that could exist in the town.
The Tour de Scottsdale, 3/4 of it is through Fountain Hills. They come this way. I mean, and yet it's branded the Tour de Scottsdale.
There's a toll opportunity right there.
Yeah. Really? Set up a toll. You coming through? That's a good idea.
Okay. Anything else on tourism, Kirsten?
I was just going to maybe add one more thought. In drawing people in, again, if going back to Danny's comments, if that's really what they want to do is draw people in. Golden, Colorado, which is another small town, on the outskirts in between Boulder and Denver, they have a Jolly Rancher factory, and they draw tourism in from something as fun and simplistic as a Jolly Rancher factory. On any given day, you could smell what flavor they're making, and it draws you in, and people go just plain and simply because they want to check it out. It's a small town and it's a small factory, but it's something like that. So maybe if, in addition to playing on the bicycling or something along those lines, maybe, another thing that we used to go visit was, because I went to college in Boulder, everybody loved Spider. Spider is a manufacturer of ski gear.
Yeah.
And the Spider company generated in a little community right outside of Boulder. And we would take trips just to go and see where they were making the gear. Because we were all passionate about that. So maybe another layer to that component is a manufacturer of these beautiful bikes on a small scale that could utilize some of your office / commercial space. It's on a small scale, and it's tying into the same theme of whatever theme they decide is the what. But again, it's if you want to draw that, it's drawing maybe more jobs, and it's drawing some possible tourism, and it's playing on that same theme.
I tell you, if you could do that, if you could find the equivalent of Spider, because they are where they are, because that's where the mountains are,
Yes.
and since cycling is here, if you could get the maker of something to, and the repair shop and the showroom to be here, along with their back office in downtown, I mean, that could be one of the things that helps to make the place. It really could. It'd be interesting to go out and find, you all, again, know the major brands of bikes, but find out who's thinking about moving somewhere, or why are they where they are, and would they ever be interested in being somewhere else? You never know what you might come across. Andy, you're thinking of something.
I am. I'm of the mindset that Mr. Scholl is, and that is looking back at the numbers. And of all the things we talked about today, the missing numbers have been the part of the retail market study that did not mention the gaps or the deficiencies. And in the final analysis, I also look back at who's the who lives here, who does this. I mean, basically, there's going to be no further population growth or minimal population growth in the Indian community that's going to possibly shop here. We're contained. I mean, you got the Fort McDowell. I mean, look at this map up here. You've got Fort McDowell Park up there. You have 2 Indian reservations. You got the hills over here. You got Scottsdale. And Scottsdale, although there are few further opportunities for retail marching out from Scottsdale, I mean, the equivalent I was talking to Duke about this morning, this might as well be a beach community, because this is an ocean out there, although there are people coming down from Payson and other things, but they're not likely to come into downtown Fountain Hills to shop. This is really pretty much like living on the edge of the ocean. And if it were my choice, if I were a policymaker, I'd want to commission the remainder of that study, find out what the gaps are, and start focusing on those first as the possibilities for coming in here. Tourism is wonderful. We may or may not get there. There are other things we may or may not get there, but we do know that we have a population of X people with Y spend, and as a starting place, I would look at what the gaps are. Not to rain on the parade, but to get back to blocking and tackling.
I agree with you. I think you need to fill in the gaps, and I saw the same thing too when I read the study. But intuitively, to me, based on the demographics, the leakage in the population, and everything else, it's the experiential retail, and particularly food and beverage, where you're lacking. I mean, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to finish this. I don't need to know whether we need another 3,000 square feet of women's shoes or 4,000 square feet of a haberdashery shop. I just think at the end of the day, the main street's going to be mostly food and beverage driven primarily. It's got to be experiential retail. It's going to appeal both to local residents for repeat visit and to tourists coming in and enjoying Fountain Hills. And so, if you set it 60,000 square feet or whatever the number is going to be to start this thing off, or whatever is a reasonable number to kind of energize this with the right kind of retailers that I think Danny has a handle on, that takes you someplace, and then you go from there, and you let it grow or maintain wherever it needs to go. But you're right, you have a very limited market, but you've also got a litany of people spending a lot of money other places, because there's no there or no there here.
So this is not quite the question that the asker imagined, but it's related. The question here is, if you had the capital, would you commit to your own vision, and why or why not? In other words, and to what? But I think, first of all, I'd say if you're the city, I would invest in the study that you're describing, right?
Yeah.
It sounds like a lot of you think that the study that you've got needs to be fleshed out. You need more evidence.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. And if the question is asking a developer, would they come in
A bit.
and spend money? I think the only way if I look at the bad tooth decay on Avenue of the Fountains as an example, the only reason I would ever do anything is because the city is committed in a very strong way to working with a bunch of people that were like-minded, and I think Lorenzo's company would be a good example. A bunch of those guys coming together and doing a development and going after the right retailers to make this an interesting spot. Without that backing and vision and almost whipping by the city to make that happen, I wouldn't risk the dollars.
Others feel the same? We've obviously launched into what appears to be a summary at just the right time, by the way, so that's good. Yes?
But what whipping tools might those be?
Well, I'm trying to say you've got to have. I would want to have a pretty reasonable assurance that at the end of the day, the city was committed to making sure that street was lined with retail, It was well thought out. It was designed properly. They were going to encourage other more dense uses around me, and that I wouldn't just be out there being a pioneer. It's one thing to take a risk and come in early on. It's another thing to be an island. And I would want to make sure assurances, barring any market changes, and obviously you can underwrite the population, you can underwrite the demographics, you can't underwrite the economy overall, but you're going to want to make sure that there's going to be like businesses around you, so there's a critical mass. Because right now there's not a critical mass. It's fragmented.
One of the challenges there, though, as you would agree, I'm sure, Robert, let's say I'm in downtown Phoenix, where Lorenzo and others have been doing some work, and you see First Fridays, whatever. City's committed, let's say they are, and it's a series of small houses being turned into galleries and shops and whatever, and if I can just convince a considerable number of those people to do things that cause it to be an attractive place, it'll start to have that vibe, and the others will be won over. In the case of the Avenue of Fountains, one side is virtually vacant. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, very few number of landholders over there. So the kind of commitment you're looking for is going to require, I think, some real ingenuity, innovation, powers of persuasion on the part of the city for you to make the commitment, because it's not just a few landholders and a few shops that are empty. You have no idea what's going to happen over there. Let's say somebody comes in and offers to build I'm making this up, a big box. They say, that's what we're going to do across the street, and you just build your bar on the other side. That's not what.
No, I'd be pretty upset.
Yeah. So I will. The city has its challenges given simply what you've got there. And it's unusual. Unlike, let's say, what you've done at Verado, where the teeth need to be filled out. But here you've got more than a tooth missing. Right. You've got whole one half.
And by the way, if you look at where LGO is now, it doesn't have to be a big space.
Absolutely not.
It doesn't have to start out large. And granted, you've got a big behemoth across the street with a lot of frontage, but there's a way of creating something and just starting in some embryonic fashion to start it to grow.
Okay. You may want to explain what LGO is.
Pardon me?
I said you may want to explain what LGO is.
You go ahead. I see you there all the time.
It was probably a 1940s neighborhood strip center that formerly included just a corner shop, a Domino's pizza, a couple of other things. It was redeveloped by a gentleman named Bob Lynn, who worked for Houston's for many years. His first step was there was a former post office behind that he redeveloped that, put in a small restaurant called Postino, and then an architecture studio, and then now there's a barber studio in between. But on the front, he organically built first what was a very interesting market come sandwich shop come winery store that led to a pizzeria coming, which led to a gelateria coming, which led to a card store and a bakery thing. It's by any reasonable measure underparked, but people come, as Duke was saying earlier, more often than not when you're standing in line, somebody next to you is from Avondale, and they'll come all the way across all across Phoenix in order to come have the neighborhood experience that exists at the place. So it's a very dynamic place. The combination of the market, the restaurant, the gelateria, the other restaurant in the back, and there was a restaurant that's now turned into an event space across the street. But it's a very unique circumstance, underparked by any rational ICSC or ULI measurement, but people will come there virtually any time, and has different people at different times of the day.
Here's what's interesting about it too. Think about one of the questions involves signage, lighting, everything else associated often with retail. It's underparked, so that's a problem. Has a lot of signage. People don't necessarily like signage. It starts blaring music at 5:30 in the morning,
right?
And yet it's raised property values. Well, why is that? People want to be there. And so now when people advertise their houses for sale in the Arcadia area, they tell you how far away they are from the LGO, from the
Grand Orange. They put in their listing agreement, they'll say this is a 2-block walk from the Grand Orange.
So when you hear things, and I understand there's discussion about noise ordinances here and whatever, and things that are necessarily the byproducts of vibrant retail, are they truly negative? They may sound negative. Maybe a sign sounds negative. Maybe sound sounds negative at the beginning. They've turned out to be to the benefit of the surrounding neighborhood, and in fact, they go out of their way to make sure their property is extremely clean, neat, and that no cars are double parked on the street. They've picked up after themselves. So it can happen. It's worth actually, for those of you interested in that kind of thing, to go visit.
Yeah, it's at 40th Street and Campbell in Phoenix.
Yeah. But do go back for a second.
Back to your comments. Sorry.
No, it's all right. So you're going to need assurances. Are you going to put risk out there? The city's going to have to stand behind it. You're going to have to know for a fact that over time this is going to grow and develop to be what it is. Once that's in place and that vision's articulated really, really well, then the first thing that's going to happen is the existing retail then is going to start changing hands, and the entrepreneurs are going to make that are going to start forming the way that street's going to feel. It's not going to come from new development. That's going to be a byproduct. It's going to come from redeveloping from a tenant standpoint, and the existing buildings that are there with the right tenant mix with some additional apertures onto the building and creating a great vibe and feeling to it. Right. It's not going to be from brand new development, at least not the first stage.
I couldn't agree with you more.
But I think the one step with that too, though, is it's also the partnership. It's going and finding those guys. People are going to the L'Orange guys, begging them to build the same thing somewhere else. Right. People are going to Sam Fox. They're going to the guys who really think outside of the box and get it, and bring them in and make the investment, be a great partner to them, let them dream something that's crazy and wild, and then let them execute it in your market. And it takes that full partnership. Just having some guy say, okay, hey, there's a box, good idea, let's go build something different. 90% of the time, we all know that just doesn't work.
The city has no control over the multitude of individual owners there on the north or west side of Avenue de la Frontera. So then you have the holdout problem. To make a La Grande Orange first, it might take 5 units to do it. The third unit guy in says, hey, I want twice as much as everybody else. Yeah. And the city can't do anything about it.
But I will tell you, though, without the conviction of the city and the partnership with the city, you can't tell the story to those entrepreneurs. If you can't tell the story to the entrepreneurs, they're not coming. End of story. So it's got to start somewhere. It is an uphill battle because, like you said, they're pulled from every direction, but they're going, and Lorenzo can attest this because he's very good at placemaking in terms of what he does on a small scale. They're going to places where the development feels like it represents their brand and who they are as an individual and their value system. And if they feel that the city is doing exactly the same thing here with existing architecture and existing buildings and are going to grow upon that, and they could be in the first stage of that, it's exciting to them. Yes. Without it, they have no interest.
Just one of the things.
I agree.
Everybody knows Sam Fox. I think the restaurateur in town who does most of everything at Kirsten. Most of those restaurants are his. He has Olive and Ivy. He has quite a few restaurants. He created a new brand called True Food that's at the Biltmore. He just opened up. Now, all of his restaurants, Sam is a genius at what he does. He knows his business very well. Sam just opened up his first restaurant in Newport Beach. True Food opened up. It's a concept that he did with Dr. Andrew Weil, and it's eating positive, great food, healthy, great food that actually tastes good. Well, the restaurant that he just opened up in Newport Beach has outdone every restaurant that he's ever opened up in Arizona by 4-fold in the first month. He is just blown away. Now, every city in California is coming to him, begging him to bring the same concept, and Sam's just looking at it like, wow, this is great. People are offering me the world to make me more successful because I'm a great partner and I'm working hard. That's what that's really what we're all up against. That's what you're up against. I mean, Sam has an incredible concept, and it's working, and he's starting to realize how valuable he is, and is realizing how valuable those partners are as well to the city, I think.
So that might lead us. I'm sorry, Kirsten, did you?
I was just going to comment on Andy's pointing out that, as did Bob on our tour on Monday, so many of those commercial retail areas over there, individually owned buildings, but all adjacent and or congruent, if you will. Perfect example of being able to bring that together is Fred Unger in Southbridge. Now, mind you, it took him 15 years to acquire property slowly but surely all through that area on the backside of Fashion Square Mall to one day be able to implement his vision of making Southbridge come together. But you really have to, and again, going back to Robert's comment about the partnership, someone has to have the vision and the partnership and want to decide that they will slowly start acquiring those and try to piece them together. And you always run the risk. Fred will tell you he has a couple of holdouts, and they've made it really difficult. And they're right in the middle of his two largest components of Southbridge. But he just tried to make your place the best that you can, and then if those people don't want to do improvements to their community or be part of what's coming together, then they're ultimately they're going to lose their tendency because you have all this new great community being built around them, in essence. Yeah.
I agree with you 100% in everything that Robert's saying as well. All I'm trying to do is focus on what the tools are other than moral suasion and leadership, the practical things that the town of Fountain Hills can do to affect the outcomes on the west side of Fountain Avenue to La Fontaine.
But I think what everybody would agree, it's a both and, right? So what Robert wants to see, or maybe anybody wants to see, is commitment. Verifiable commitment, and then backed up by the numbers, if you will, that would result from seeing that commitment through. And maybe at 3 o'clock we're supposed to get into the final action plan. It seems like what you just described in part was, if not the bulk of, the action plan, which is to say, this is a special place. We're Fountain Hills. We know what our assets are. We hear, we'd be happy to walk you through them. This is our commitment as a city to making the following happen. And the Sam Fox example, where people are surprised, LGOs had the same thing. The owners are being caused to consider all kinds of options because everybody wants them. You go out and try to find Lorenzo, whoever it is, to come into your city. This is what we want to have happen here. And we think you're the kind of entrepreneur, the kind of retailer, kind of quality that was brought up by Danny at the beginning. We think you're the kind of person we want here. And if you come and a few others come like you, this is what we think is going to unfold, and these are the numbers that are going to result. But that plan is supplementary, if not an overlay, on top of the physical plan that we see over there, right? So, and I'm not sure, who does that plan? How does that happen? Do you have a consultant who helps you develop it? How does that, how do we get this plan made up? The city's thinking tomorrow morning. Did you hear what they were saying at the end? We need this thing that Robert described. How do we get there? What would you recommend to them? How do we get to that point? What?
You talking about the actual plan document to go out and
A little bit. You said
the storyboard that goes behind all this?
A little bit. You said, I want to see, I'm going to come in here if I believe that what you're telling me is going to happen and I see your level of commitment. What have I given to somebody, or what have I directed them to prove that's going to be the case, that I'm in it?
Look at Red Development downtown Phoenix. The new development downtown Phoenix. Right next door, they built. And there's a new. I don't know if it's a new high rise. I don't know how it all worked out. I'm sure you know better than I do. But there's 10 of the major law firms all moved into one building right in that core.
Oh no, but that's the project. But Red was attracted because the city said, "Oh, we're committed.
Yeah.
Here's $100 million,
And
we're going to
they
take over
said,
the
"We're
park."
closing these
Because
streets. Yeah.
we believe so much in retail happening here. We're going to take over City Park. We're going to buy a piece of land for $25 million, and we're going to help you build an underground parking lot.
And they got
that's
Nobu.
the thing.
They got Nobu. They got all the top chefs. I mean, they got everybody together to buy up on the plan.
They came after the city's action plan said, we are going to have this downtown. And for Andy, who's building a building just up the street without the same kind of incentives, it's actually could be a little bit off-putting. But nevertheless, the city was so sure that its two key blocks on Central and Washington could not possibly remain as parking lots. They were prepared to put some effort into that. That's what you're looking for, I think, right? So I'm trying to imagine, as the city tries to recoup from everything we've thrown at them today, how do they start tomorrow to help build that vision on top of the great work that Vern and his colleagues have done? What do you have? I'm sorry to be pushing a little bit. What does that look like?
Earlier on, you guys walked us through that you'd built strengths and weaknesses, or you said SWOT analysis, which you showed us strengths and weaknesses. The other half of that is to really look at your opportunities and threats. And I think, as Andy pointed out, and as I pointed out earlier, finding out what's missing, quantifying that, quantifying what it takes to attract and support that would be, one of the most important studies I think you could do, which is really the opportunities portion of a SWOT analysis. Obviously, you'd want to uncover the threats that could unravel such a plan. But I think as you get into exploring what real opportunities are and measuring them, and then putting together the strategies to go execute on those opportunities, I think you'll begin to see who are the right people to approach, whether it's user-driven, whether it's developer-driven, whether it's where the city's going to have to, focus on a key parcel and get ownership of that, because everything else will then fall into place if we can do something with that. I really think further exploration into the opportunities, the gaps, what's missing, what do our residents want? Do we want to be do we want to try and stop the leakage, or are we just going to try and focus on food and beverage type of destinations? So I think crystallizing a little bit more what exactly those opportunities are is a very important step, I think.
So I'm imagining, I'm sorry, I'm pushing this a little bit, the brochure, the website, whatever it might be, it has the analysis that you just described, which fills in the blanks there. And I think we all agree that you've told us what supposedly is available in terms of market need, but not what you currently have and how it's going to play out. So we need some serious analysis. We need the best effort at the what question, the bigger what question. What do you want to be when you grow up? But also some of these attractors, and that's a community project of sorts.
The tools that you'll make available.
Yeah, the tools, okay.
The economic development tools.
That's right.
And maybe a few years of just dollars spent in energizing that plan, whether that's through economic development officials, whether it's through creating some kind of a developers advisory board that is a think tank that's available for you to go to at any time to respond to requests, properly respond to opportunities that come along. I think as you just immerse yourself into that community, you'll find the people that you need to be working with, and the best ideas will come out of those relationships, I think.
And don't forget the landowners and the building owners. If they're not coming together now, sharing that same kind of vision, the city's not getting excited and helping them buy into this process, then we're missing something. Mm-hmm. But the tools that Dave talked about are very critical. Kind of understanding everything you've got in your arsenal, everything the city can do, understanding that the ability and desire of the existing landowners and business owners to be part of this, and then what bold moves the city can they do, depending on the budgetary constraints, whether it's to buy a piece of property, or is it to joint venture something. What is it that they need to do to help be that catalyst?
The landowners are going to have to be convinced that this whole process is adding value to get behind it. And nobody can predict the future, and we don't know where the economy is going to go, but they've got to see the makings of a pretty good roadmap towards something that adds value to what their property currently is right now. Even with the changes, we moved the parking, we did a bunch of things, such that the asset that they currently have now is only enhanced.
And you would think that based on the current state of the way things are laid out and the economy, this is the best time to be doing it.
That's key. So I think we've covered most of the questions that were handed in on cards, but this might be an opportunity, and we purposely weren't going to open up the floor because to all questions, I think that makes sense in a meeting like this. But I did want to have the opportunity to either ask the mayor and or council people, who I know have been here for the most of the day, whether you have any thoughts about what you're hearing, and whether we've hit the issues that you wanted covered, or anything you might want to bring up, as you've heard us talking at the end about how to bring closure to this discussion, but also get ready for the next step. Do you have questions like maybe I do about how to implement?
You come to me.
I want all the answers. I'd like, as I mentioned at lunch, a couple of property owners down here to put some deals together to get things rolling. But if that can't be done, then I'd like to hear a little bit about more implementation along the avenue, maybe some more ideas, specifics, and also hospitality. I know it was talked about. I wouldn't mind hearing a little bit more about that. And I think I'm good on the tourism piece, unless you've got a definition for me. I had to step out, obviously, so I missed the scale discussion, so I'm not sure how far you got with that, but I know that was initially what Swaback targeted as a discussion item.
We didn't pull the scale slides up. We could if you'd like us to, but we didn't do that. We had actually a very good discussion about regulation and incentivizing certain opportunities.
But apart from that, I'll open up. Any other council members have questions, but implementation, that's what I'd like to hear more of, but I know that's a challenge.
Well, I got to tell you, Mayor, the one thing that Dave said earlier I thought was really relevant. The next step, if I were in your shoes, would be to put together an advisory panel of outside developers, some of your current landowners and stakeholders downtown now, as well as business owners, and start having this cross-pollination, if you will, and talk about some of the vision, and talk about some of the specific land uses on the avenue, including hospitality, including multifamily, including condos and all that kind of stuff, and start building some consensus and some excitement for what's going on. Because the minute they get excited about it, they're going to start rethinking about how much dollars they're putting into their space. You know, guys like Lorenzo are going to go out and think about, okay, now how can I acquire a piece of property down here and make my move? And so I think there just needs to be kind of, I like the melting pot, if you will, of some of the ideas with the different stakeholders to take it from this point going forward, concurrently while the city's looking at what cities can do well. But I'd like to see the private sector come inside and also be part of this in a big way.
And what I hear you saying is that private sector to private sector might move the ball down the field. So if property owners are talking to people like Lorenzo or yourself or Dave or whoever else who's actually been there, done that, said this is how it turned out, trust me, it works pretty well, and they actually see some evidence of that. That might help you get where you need to go with these folks, and they can have the kind of conversation that landowners and developers might have in a very different setting than this one.
Apart from the other things that you talked about, I'm pretty confident, but particularly through the downtown vision plan process we went through, we have consensus. We have a great deal of support for what you said seemed like one of the more important things was to focus on something maybe that's not huge right now, but to get to that retail and space along the avenue, the fountains going. I think we can get behind that 100% very quickly and come up with something that might tell a developer that, or a partner of some sort, that story. And then I think a lot of what you shared so far about the organic growth of events that are already occurring and expanding those, I think we can work on that. Apart from, or if you want to go more into the retail or the area along the avenue and get a little more specific on that, I think that would be helpful. But other council members, any other thoughts on that? Lori, anything more that would be helpful? Okay.
Next step is, but you guys have had the opportunity to.
Henry's going to come forward here. Leger, and speak in the microphone.
For our sake, we've met.
For the millions,
introduce yourself to the panel.
For the millions at home.
First of all, thanks for being here. Your expertise is awesome. I wish we could spend more time with you all. I guess sitting here, we're kind of at an academic and an esoteric level from my observations, and Danny's about the only one that's down to earth. No, excuse me. But
down to the fountain.
But I do appreciate your comments, because I think holistically you need to look at things like that. You know, I've sat with several of you at lunch, and I kept stating that we're doing a lot. There's a lot of activity. We're partnering with the chamber. We're partnering with so many groups in town. I mean, it's a town driven by volunteers, and that's an excellent thing. It also brings a lot of diverse opinions to the table, which makes solutions a lot more difficult and complex to get to. But to cut to the chase, I guess we're really looking for specifics. You've had an opportunity to study our town. You've seen Vern's plan. There's no plan that is perfect, but I think it has us pointed in the right direction. So from my perspective, to answer the question that's been posed, what do we need to do next? What is the next step to make this happen in our community, given the current economic climate and some of the constraints that we're up against? Top three things that we need to do. I've heard the notion of getting together a group of developers, and I think that sounds like a good idea. So I'm looking for more specifics. Thank you.
I'm going to start with the response. I think one of the things I'm getting out of this is we've got this 9-district area plan, and I think today most of the conversation gravitated to the avenue. So I think, if I was coming in to develop a project here, I want to know what you as citizens of Fountain Hills, what are you trying to achieve? What do you want to accomplish? I think we got to start there. Because that's really going to affect how we go. It's like the first thing we need to get clarity on. Then, sort of what Danny is saying, so that's the what. Then what's the why behind the what? What's compelling you to do this? Because I think that's what's going to keep people passionate to work through all the challenges. And I think if we're clear on what we're trying to do and we understand why we're going to do it, Then I think the next thing is we need to focus on an area to start. It's, after driving that area, we specialize in small projects. To me, that's a big area. It's really not that big, but I think now we got to get to the micro level and say, okay, where are we going to start? Where's the best place to start? And then you can just focus from there and put your energy into that. And then you can go to implementation and strategic planning. And then I think, I was just sort of writing the 5 things that I would do as 5 priorities for the next step in action. And then the final thing is just commit to that process and take action. And you just got to take one step at a time. Sort of my observation.
How many of you have developers, have cities coming to you saying, have you ever seen tools like this that will help you do what you want to do? I mean, have really actively. Good examples? And I assume that when you see that, your ears perk up and you sort of respond positively?
Yep. I mean, I was in a very luxurious position for a lot of years, whereas I had cities asking for behemoth regional malls, and they would roll out red carpet and show all the tools that they could dream of and say they'd do whatever it took. So that certainly worked for me, and it was great. I think some of the best examples we had were with very creative, aggressive cities that just said, you tell us what it's going to take, give us some time to go organize, and we'll partner with you and make it happen. So I think the most important thing that the town can do is get a handle on what there's demand for. And if that demand is developer demand, then go rub elbows with developers every day and all day. And if it's user-tenant demand, and quite frankly, it's going to be both, but you need to be out seeing what is it that wants to be here and what kind of tools do they need. And, if you want specifics, I would say the intersection of Saguaro and Avenue of the Fountain should be ground zero. I wouldn't start on the Fountain side of the street, but you've got a perfect example of retail sitting existing on one side of that avenue, and you've got a vacant land on the other. You've got some existing storefront, and you've got a lake amenity directly across the street. And I would focus there and try and come up with some ways to make something happen right there, and then, fan that flame however you can and see if it'll just spread and spread and spread. But that gives you an opportunity for redevelopment on one side of the street, ground up on the other, and take advantage of and start, promoting that amazing amenity just directly across the street at the park and the lake.
Which I think to answer, I think that's a really good answer to your question. I don't know how much more precise without Lorenzo getting started right now on giving you a performance we could be. There's the spot. Helping to determine what the what is, that goes along with your plan. The tools that the city can show that are going to help to incentivize that thing happening. And the market study that would tell you what the things are that are going into that focal spot. I mean, that's sort of it, I think.
And how are you going to drive people here to make the person be successful? How are you going to give people a chance to run a good, successful business?
Right.
Based on, 60% of the individuals that live here are over 50, right? That's what I heard earlier.
There's a few things for action steps. I would take, I don't know who is in charge in your city of your events, whether it's third party like Boys Club or whatever, but I would, over the next 12 months, how many weekend events do you already have on your books? And if you're doing them yourself, I would engage interviewing a third-party source like someone to my left here today that can take it to a new level. And I would decide whether I want resumes on developers or whether I want interfacing. It's really cool to hear David say, go pound the flesh, be in front of them, smell them, taste them, be there. Because in the same context as retailers, personally, I'm not that concerned about gaps. I like to see the studies and understand them so I know where we are, where I am. But I am so committed to users over uses. I'll take a bad use with a good user all day long over a good use with a bad user. I'm about people. And your developer needs to be someone that you trust, that is about people. It's about someone that understands and respects you and the community. It's really the integrity and the purity of what commerce is all about. And I would come up with a strategy over the next 3 months, 6 months. How many places can I go and developers can I talk to? And God bless their slicks and their brochures and their resumes, but what are they like sitting down in an hour and a half when someone pushes on them and you provoke them and you nurture them and you challenge them? What are they like? What do other people say about them? What is the end of the product like? And those are abstract, which is an oxymoron, abstract implementation components that just get you closer to what it is you really want to do and who you want to do it with. And in that process, there will be a light bulb truly goes on that says, however, in my how, the situation will be the boss. And the boss that we're facing today is a devil. The economic climate, the instability, the volatility, no one can predict. If they can, God bless them, I haven't heard it yet. The only people I like to listen to about what's going to happen in the future are those that say, I don't know, but here's what I hope for. So the situation is the boss. If you're wanting getting together with your group tomorrow morning and have a definitive timeline of what you're going to do, then you're denying who the boss is on this, and it's the situation. But you can be prepared, and you can know who you want to do it with, and you can know what it is you want to do, but how? It may take some time to ferret that out. In the meantime, I want to tell you the right user is not that concerned about address. They are concerned about being able to express their talent. So ground zero can even come a little bit later if it's just some fun thing that is happening. What I have is I drove through the city early this morning here and just getting a feel because I wasn't able to be here Monday. So I took your counsel and I did a little driving. But I've been here before. I love golfing out here, and art is something that seems to be very precious. That's one of the consistent threads that goes through. I even walked through over where we had lunch and around here. There seems to be a consistent thread of art. Well, I would spend time doing some research on the life, death, resurrection, and mediocrity of Torpedo Factory in Washington, D.C., and find out how many others are like those. And that could be anywhere. That could be in a temporary tent. There's so many things that can be done. You know, I just watched, my wife and I just went to a movie that was 5 stars that is bone cold or bone south or whatever in the Missouri and the Ozarks of this very shallow gene pool of poverty that everybody's related to everybody, and it's the integrity of the movie is phenomenal. And my wife and I walked out of that movie touched to our core about how people can do something with nothing, how they can survive. So while you're waiting, you know, because life is what happens while you're making plans, and it just is. And so there's some little fun things. If there's a David that's willing to be in Jerome, Arizona, in a little place on Main Street that is really nothing to look at, but he's expressing his art, and he's happy if he has a $1,000 day. He's ecstatic if he has a $1,400 day. Those people, this city needs some apostles. They need some evangelists that are expressing the story of this town, and they're practicing it. I would say, what can I do to define this love for art in this community, to take that to the next level? And where do I have a vacancy in this town that if I found someone, you found someone, that they just want to express themselves in that vacancy? And it's not about co-tenancy. It's not about a project. It's about expression. And it's making the energy begin to evolve while you're making plans, bowing to the situation, knowing that it will change in time.
And interesting enough, some of those people might choose to cause the thing that you're describing in the abstract on Saguaro, or somewhere else where it's easier, where the building's the leftover gas station, this, that, or the other.
Absolutely.
The way
The coolest things.
what you're describing will probably not happen downtown unless you really reach out to those folks.
Downtown's only going to happen with a defined plan, defined action steps, a defined budget, and a defined schedule. Tell me, who is silly enough to think that that can happen this year? I mean, that's just not my reality.
Yeah. Okay. We have a card came in, and I think we know the answer to these questions. In fact, I think we've been answering them. But just in case, if the city provided, funded, subsidized the building on the avenue, would that help? Well, sure. Mr. Mayor, if the city created an event every weekend, I think you've answered that saying, of course. But what is it? Mm-hmm. But I think that could not but help. If the city incentivized a major anchor, an employment or a school, would these help? Work? I think, sure. I mean, I think the spider example is a good one.
Yes.
A business related to outdoor activity that's related to where you are. So I think the answers to your questions, I mean, they're actually really good in that you're on the same thread I think we are of trying to figure out what the tools could be that cause the answer to these questions to be yes. So I think the answer to them is yes. But we are in a circumstance, let's just put it that way, that doesn't necessarily allow for all of the wish list here to be addressed. It will. Andy, and then we'll bring this to closure.
Well, particularly if you look at the graphic on the wall over there, I don't understand what the relationship is between all those people, but I know that there is an organization of some sort that collectively either owns or operates or whatever all that interstitial space. So it's pretty clear to me that whatever I think that while David's suggestion is probably the right focus, it could be on would that be the east side of Fountain Avenue? On the east side of Fountain Avenue in that space by the Holiday Inn, but it might as easily happen on the west side of it there. But I think that the heart of this conversation, since these are the property owners and they already have either a tight or loose aggregation of interests, would be a conversation that starts with those people. I'm not sure that the organization applies to all 4 blocks. If there's subdivisions of the organization, like states within a 4-block country, or how that works. But at least you have a platform, a quasi-management platform, a conversational platform to start to build the enthusiasm for what it is you want to do. And it could, I have no idea, maybe these conversations have already occurred, and maybe that level of enthusiasm is already there. But given the fact that, we were talking about this tongue-in-cheek earlier, the only perhaps legal way that the city could start to assemble land was if they were to declare this a redevelopment zone, which I don't think is in the spirit of the community and hardly justifiable with $300,000 or $1 million condominiums within a short walking distance. The city's powers to assemble land and do things is quite limited. Having dealt with small businesses in urban contexts before, I know that whatever alliances they may have in the aggregate sometimes literally stop at the property line of each of those small businesses. So there may not be a holistic view about things, but that could be a conversation that evolves into action. I mean, that's my only observation, because you do have, at least you have some organizational structure. How tight or how loose it is only you all know. So that's what I would add to the thing.
While Andy's referring to the slide, and the mayor asked if we had done this, and you were out of the room, and I didn't do it, so I'll just hit, if I could, hit 1 or 2 slides here. Like you could adjust the lights accordingly. And all this take 3 minutes. But as a reminder, when we all on the panel started looking at this, there's your planning district. So you can see all those zones. We looked at it here, and it's interesting that others, like Robert, have focused on the Avenue of the Fountains. That maybe wasn't by accident. There it is. It's about 25 acres. So we began comparing it to, say, here we are at Kierland. That area alone, let alone the rest of your district, dwarfs the center of Kierland. Or if you want to think about what it's like relative to a project that Robert knows very well that DMV did, Verrado, and how small its commercial retail district is in the center. Again, just your Avenue of the Fountains is more than twice the size of what they imagined for that town. Or lastly, Scottsdale, you all know Scottsdale Road, how much of Scottsdale Road you would take up, or compared to Mill Avenue in Tempe, how much space just the Avenue of the Fountains is. So the reason for them to, the collective wisdom of the panel to say, find a spot and start, is that the area that you're talking about on that plan over there, let alone just the 25 acres of the Avenue of the Fountain, is really large. And if you're trying to be everywhere all the time, you won't get started. And so I think the wisdom here is to find a place, demonstrate high quality, authenticity, the right people. Danny's not in the room, but actually who you're dealing with really matters. Find a really great place that's as fail-safe as it could possibly be to begin your work, and start there and figure out how to get in front of the right people who can help you get that done. Because that is a lot of area that you've got to cover.
I'd love to just emphasize something Danny said as well. And we're in a season right now where a lot of people have got capacity. Take the time to research the people you get involved with or you invite into your community and make sure they're just good people. I mean, I'm part of an industry that's got lots of history of having unscrupulous sort of shyster type A's running throughout the real estate development industry for 100 years. And, there's plenty out there that are good people. Look for the integrity. Look for the people that believe in a win-win approach. Look for the people that are as interested in overachieving for you as a community as they are for themselves. And I think, Danny set the tone earlier. This is about relationships, people, and I think if you search for those people, you'll be much better rewarded than just throwing your tools at anybody that walks in and wondering why they're not around 2 years later. I mean, you need some people that really believe in you and are willing to make long-term commitments for overachieving out here.
And I might suggest in conclusion, the answer to the specifics, I think we're nudging up to in this public setting. But I think the advisory group of developers or others in a different kind of conversation, maybe talking to someone with the wisdom of Dave, who can help you to identify those people of integrity and long-standing who are going to get you where you want to go. And they do well by themselves in the process. I think that's the kind of conversation that will follow from this one. So some of the details can't necessarily be fleshed out in such a setting, but I think we're identifying the kind of conversations that need to follow from this session.
Yes. One thing back on the physical side of it. Yes. If you went mid-block, where I agree with Dave, where you start and you work towards the lake and you look at both sides of the street, is that about 1,000 linear feet? Is half of that street?
Yes, it's about 2,000 feet long.
If you do 1,000 feet, linear feet for this community, that would be more than adequate for an intensive retail project. After that, north of it is going to have to be more mixed use and a little bit more eclectic blend of different commercial uses over time, but it would not be a straight retail area.
Right.
Just so we're straight on that one.
Yeah. And by the way, if you had 1,000 feet of vibrant retail, the rest will follow. I mean, if it's really that good, if it's jumping, I mean, it may or may not.
Other uses will follow.
Yeah, other uses. But I mean, things will happen. 1,000 linear feet of vibrant activity would dwarf, we've referred to La Grande Orange and other places. 300 maybe, 200?
Yeah.
And it's, that cash register is busy all day long. Yeah, so it wouldn't take much to get it going. So I would just like to thank everybody who's stuck it out with us today, and I particularly want to thank a few people in the audience. Again, ULI is very happy to come out to communities and do this. It's a pleasure for us. We learn something every time we do it. But there's a committee of people who decide where we should devote our time and energy, and it's often based on people really wanting to hear what we have to say and to work with us. And so in that respect, I really want to thank Lance Ross, Trevor Barger, and George Scholl, who are the committee chairs in charge of deciding where we conduct these ASTAPs. And a few of them are in the room, and I want to thank you for doing this. Dave Davis and Sharif Ayoub, who are here. Sharif is in the back, Dave is in front. They helped put together a lot of materials that help to educate us on the panel about what we were talking about. And Walter Morlock, who's standing in the back with his arms crossed, has led me into this process very rapidly, and I've enjoyed every minute of it, Walter. But I know he's been on the ground here along with others at ULI for the past year, at least, getting us ready for this day. And I know our work isn't done, but I want to thank Walter for that. And lastly, on the bus ride, the city, we had Bob Rogers and Lori Gary. Couldn't have been more helpful. The mayor himself was on the tour, showing us all his childhood haunts, and also city manager Rick Davis. But all of you have made it very easy for us to participate, dive into this. As I said, it's an education that goes both ways. We've appreciated all of your time. I hope we have accomplished what it is you wanted us to do today, but we'll be available in the future as well. So thank you very much for all of your time.
Hey, thank you very much. I know I came up here and asked a few more things, but I just thought we'd see if there's anyone out here that might have a couple questions yet. Just informally open it up for a few minutes if there are any more questions out there. Stump the panelist questions. But good, Mark, come on up. And when you have a question, when you come up here, speak into the microphone, state your name, serial number. No, just your name. Thanks, Mark.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Panelists, my name is Mark McDermott, and I'm affiliated with the Chamber here, and I'm the guy that runs the Tourism Bureau. And a lot of what I heard you say today I liked very much, especially some things, in particular with regard to elements at Fountain Park that we might take a look at. Bringing the water more into use, I think, was one that really particularly struck home with me, and I think something that we should take a good hard look at, as well as other aspects of it in terms of the very, I thought, good insights into what might work and might not work in the way of a venue in the park. I think we've been talking since Swaback Partners finished this project a year ago now about the fact that the park is our one area of land that is not privately owned, it's publicly owned, and maybe presents an opportunity for us there to do something. I also at the same time heard some hesitancy expressed here about doing things in the park at the present time rather than as opposed to doing things along the avenue. And one of our feelings, at least from the tourism perspective, is that we really desperately need to create this destination attraction here, some kind of destination attraction here in order to get the foot traffic into town that we need to not only maintain the vibrancy of our existing businesses, but also to develop additional businesses coming in. And we've been thinking very seriously that the development of what is right now to all of us, in a lot of our minds, a very underutilized park is the opportunity first at hand to us. And I just kind of like to hear a little bit more of what you guys might be thinking in terms of what the potential of the park might be with regard to the overall plan. Okay? Thank you.
I talked a little bit about this at lunch. I think the park is an amazing opportunity. I think it could be a combination of civic and commerce, recreation, all coming together, that it could be, that exact sort of destination that you're talking about. It just happens to be a big enough land component that, it could be 8, 10, 15 years developing that out. And as long as there's opportunities there with that environment, I think it'd be tough to get somebody to go 500 feet away and sit by themselves out on the avenue. So I think there needs to just be some thinking about how you complement and stretch out some energy all along the avenue rather than, turn all that land over available to the private sector and then wonder why everything's going on right along the shore and not marching its way up the avenue. So it's just balance, and maybe you make recreational opportunities and civic opportunities available in the early years, try and get the businesses established, and then save some key pads to be used later as infill, as opposed to having that be the first places where ground is broken. That's all my reluctancy was.
I would say the panel was being both alert and polite. The fountain and the body of water was what established the whole community. That was the thing that said, we're going to be here for all time, and we can't do it just with buildings, so that's why the body of water was placed where it was, the fountain, and it remains your logo to this day. As someone pointed out here today, the town in some ways has outgrown the fountain. It's more mature. That's what it took to get it going. But I think because we were asked to come in, there's the plan on the wall, and it didn't show a lot of development, whatever that might be, on the grassy areas, and we did walk them a little bit. We didn't venture in there for fear that a lot of people would say, listen, that's a park, and don't be populating with all kinds of other uses. So I think we politely didn't go in there. But if you could imagine yourself surrounding your number one amenity with a few more opportunities to be on the water, to be in the water with a boat, or to be on the water's edge having dinner, and or doing some other things that were involving commerce of all types, and you're prepared to do that, every other city on the planet would love to have access to water like that. San Antonio's built around really not a body of water, but just a trickle of water, a whole lot of commerce. I dealt with a plan in Fort Worth, which is trying to create a body of water like that so they can completely surround it with retail, commercial, office. You've already got it. So if you can venture in there and get community buy-in to that, I think there's much more you could do in the water, given the caution that Dave just gave you. Don't expect that and everything on the avenue, not let alone further into the town center to develop. It's still a lot of stuff. But I think we politely didn't offer too much in that regard.
Yeah, the only other thing I'd say do too is if you really want to have a synergy of uses, and you want hospitality, you want residential, you want this thing, you're going to need more space than just lakefront. I mean, I love the idea of the lakefront, but to me, I think I would start where you've got the big gaps in your teeth.
Right.
Get that right. It's a multitude of uses. I think you can do more interesting things there because you have more parking, you've got more ingress and egress and everything else than try to jam everything on a grassy knoll over the lake.
Couldn't agree
my
more.
opinion.
And that's the place where in town you eat, you stay, whatever, and then you take that evening walk around there with the bar that's on the other side or whatever it is.
Absolutely. The juxtaposition to the street, to the lake.
Yes.
Without that, I'd probably migrate my thoughts down to the lake.
Yep.
But because of the fact you've got that vision over it, it's pretty strong.
But the commencement of what David calls civic uses, i.e. access to the water, electric boats, paddle boats, and those kinds of things, may be the first step of a tourism draw, that you have people who come here to take advantage of that. Not only that, I think it becomes a point of town pride as well. And this is the town dock. You've got these things. All of a sudden, the people who live around the perimeter of it, who may view active life on the water or on the edge of the water as being perhaps a detriment to their property value. Who knows what people think? I think you can turn that around to a positive and say, hey, look how easy it is to walk down here and go get a paddle boat and take my friends in from out of town. And I know you have this concern about the fountain in the middle, but those are known times, and you can put constraints about how people get there. But I think this activation of the thing in a civic manner, as opposed to necessarily a commercial manner, may be the first step in a tourism strategy that reflects the maturity of the community and the growth of the community.
I've got just a couple other little things based on events and whatnot. The park is absolutely beautiful. I've got 10 events in my mind that I could easily bring to your community. But one thing real quick, as everybody knows, or I don't know if you all know, but February 14, 2012 is Arizona Centennial. There is absolutely no reason why you don't brand yourself, get your identity, figure out who you are, and do your own centennial event here in Fountain Hills and make it, just really kick that off, number one. Number two, as I was driving in today, I saw the beautiful sign saying the Sister Cities. I do the Sister Cities event for the city of Phoenix, and it did what it did. I tied it in with Alliance. It's a big beer festival, and everybody's going, how does that really relate? And what I've done is I took all the sister cities, I made tents for all of them, and I turned it into a little mini Epcot Center in downtown Phoenix at Horizon Park. And we tie it in with, we're tying it in with the schools because they want to take it to the next level. But there's another organic, easy thing. You've got the committees, you've got the sister cities. It's another great way to brand a weekend and to have activities for your kids to come out, and then maybe go get sister schools to tie it in with you, to bring people into your park again, another reason to utilize that magnificent park. I'm producing an event called Greenstock. It's Woodstock, but it's totally a green-themed event. I was doing it at Westworld. I pulled it because it's just too expensive. They take all the revenue streams. We're looking for a place to do it. This park makes perfectly good sense to bring that kind of an event into. So there's just a couple other, based on what I do, ideas, but they're things that you guys already all have. And I'm sure you don't need me for any of it. I'm sure you guys have every idea, and you do a phenomenal job with your art festival already. So,
you squeezed Reed, didn't you, Danny?
I said I'm like drinking out of a fire hydrant.
That's awesome. Thanks, Mark. Any other questions from the audience? Anyone online? There's no way to contact us. All right. Well, again, as the mayor of the town, represent the council, just thank you very much thank you ULI, thanks staff and the co-chairs for selecting Fountain Hills. It's been a dream of mine to have you guys out here and to look at our beautiful town and to discover it. as well, which you all mentioned, having not been out here. Great opportunity for Fountain Hills to get that exposure and have your eyeballs on our community and to see all the potential that there is and help us with our scale and our downtown vision plan and helping to get that implemented. But Duke, you did a great job.
And I'd like to thank George Bosworth, the Executive Director of the ULI, staying in the back, who's participated in this all day and offered some great advice to me over lunch. So, George, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, George. Very nice. With no more questions, thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Oh, hi, Frank. How are you, sir?